Welcome everyone to the Wrestle Pod. Subscribe now for more pro wrestling and pop culture content.
So it gets to the point where I really broke was fucking the Black Hat Sun, where they've been hanging out. I caught them holding hands together on the tour. They were getting close to the time before I'm giving a fuck, okay? I'm not a double standard type guy. I'm a racist to a point. Yeah. You know, fucking there's, but then when it comes to nice people, you know,
We all are that way.
yeah, but when it comes to nice people, you can't say. I don't give a fuck shit. I'm not a player. I'm a football player. I'm a basketball player. That has to game. If we're gonna fuck with vendors, let's get a wristwatch.
Oh no, not crayon on the wall.
Under stress, got a mess. Hi, Hulk Hogan.
I'm so broke. I need cash today, and the bank turned me down. This car is the only thing I own. Hulk Hogan!
This is the athlete of the 80s, an actor, a surfer, businessman, and highest-grossing wrestler on the pro circuit. Undefeated in 5 years, this is one incredible Hulk.
I want to cast light onto the shadows of a once glistening career and uncover the real truth behind one of pop culture's biggest heroes.
Weighing 320 pounds, ladies and gentlemen, Hulk Hogan.
The international superstar born Terry Bollea was recently seen by millions in a different light.
Okay, maniacs, here we go. We were not the most liked guys in the dressing room. We had a ton of heat with everybody.
In a very short amount of time, and financially I was devastated. I've had a rough couple of years. I've had some really crazy years.
The WWE broke ties with you. Did you expect that was going to happen?
No, I didn't.
There are no two ways about it, no real room for debate. Hulk Hogan is one of the most culturally significant pro wrestlers to have ever laced up his boots. And beyond that, is one of the most recognisable faces of the 20th century in the United States. He made the transition from the wrestling ring to the silver screen and maintained a presence as a notable public figure for over 4 decades. Beloved by millions around the globe for his heroic antics and succession of high caliber victories throughout the 80s and 90s, it's safe to say that Terry Bollea, the man behind the legend, has reaped the rewards of his success. But in the modern day, as stories continue to surface online via social media and through tell-all autobiographies, the shine that once surrounded this immortal figure has begun to wear off. The never-give-up attitude and good guy shell has begun to crack under the weight of insurmountable evidence, which will be the topic of this video. I want to take a serious look into the history of the Hulk, how he became the immortal one, and claim such prominence as Hulkamania became mainstream. With such a storied, eventful, and somewhat distant past, it can be hard to really wrap your head around the ways in which things played out, and just how often Hulk came out on top. I want to give credit to a man who worked incredibly hard to achieve his unprecedented success and show his climb from small town boy to king of the mountain, and how, over the last decade or so, a twisted web of lies and manipulation have been uncovered and have brought the king falling from his throne. Born on August the 11th, 1953, in Augusta, Georgia, Terry Gene Bollea, better known by his in-ring persona of Hulk Hogan, is one of the most recognised wrestling stars worldwide, questionably the most popular wrestler of the 1980s. Shortly after being born, Bollea's family would move to Port Tampa in Florida, where he would spend his formative years. As he grew up, he began to excel at baseball and even drew scouts from the Cincinnati Reds and New York Yankees. His career in baseball was short-lived, however, after Belair suffered an injury which meant he was unable to continue playing. Around the age of 16, Terry Bollea began to regularly attend wrestling events at the Tampa Sportatorium, as his passion for pro wrestling grew into something more than just a passing phase. Bollea has gone on to say that around this time, the first wrestler to really grab his attention and inspire him was Dusty Rhodes during his time at high school. Bollea's other main passion was music. He spent many of his teen years performing with a bass guitar for several different bands in the local area, even dropping out of university in South Florida to focus on his musical career. Always the showman, by 1976, Bollea had formed a band with 2 other amateur musicians, which would turn out to be unexpectedly popular in the local area. Known as Ruckus, the band toured around bars and clubs in the Tampa Bay area. Bollea's practice with the electric guitar and bass were beginning to pay off, and he explained in an interview that this was the first time that he began to feel really confident on stage. Bitten by something of a performer's bug, Bollea decided that in order to stand out and to further improve his onstage presence, he would begin to fill out his already tall frame, starting to lift weights around the Tampa Bay area in Florida at a notorious pro wrestling hub, Hector's Gym. And thus, at the time as Bollea's Ruckus band began to really hit their stride and get repeat bookings at some of Tampa's largest bars and clubs, they performed at a show which was attended by legendary wrestlers and backstage producers, Jack and Jerry Briscoe. The pair, who were always scouting for the newest potential signing, were taken aback by Bollea's size and asked him to give pro wrestling a try.
I'm just a stark-raising maniac whenever you see me.
When Bollea hesitantly agreed, he was sent to train under well-respected wrestling trainer Hiro Matsuda, a man whose job it was then to train the new recruits for Championship Wrestling from Florida, the promotion in which Terry Bollea would make his very first in-ring appearance. This is where we see the first friction of Bollea's wrestling career occur. As his ability to perform in the ring grew, so did the beginning of what is now a notoriously large ego. Before even stepping into the ring, Bollea's career with CWF was almost over when the then owner of the company and his son refused to allow Bollea his first match on the grounds of some undisclosed dispute between Bollea and Mike Graham, one of the head bookers for CWF and son of head of the company, Eddie Graham. However, Bollea's decision to take pro wrestling more seriously and disband his musical work with Ruckus showed to Eddie and Mike Graham his dedication to the industry. Although this dispute was apparently small enough to be overcome with an adult conversation and some well-meant apologies, since then we've seen this ego and friction of Bollea become one of the core components of his entire story. As Terry Bollea worked in the gym, one day he was approached once again by Jack Briscoe, who handed him his first ever pair of pro wrestling boots and disclosed the date and time of Bollea's very first match. On August the 10th, 1977, Terry Bollea fought against Brian Blair in a matchup in Fort Myers, Florida, and as the bell rang and the match was observed by just a small handful of passionate fans, many of whom didn't know the first thing about Terry Bollea or the fact that they had just witnessed the very first match of a career which would become so legendary. Soon after this time, Bollea had his face hidden from the crowd so as to allow him more time in the ring in front of a crowd without the risk of memorable amateur mistakes ruining his reputation with the locals. Under the persona of the Super Destroyer, a character which has to date been played by a disputed amount of men, but whom was first created by Don Jardine, Bollea's version of the Super Destroyer saw him dressed in black and red with a black lucha mask covered in stars. After a year's worth of training, Bollea began to concede that Hiro Matsuda was overbearing and starting to hold him back. Bollea believed he would see faster improvement from his training and moved on from CWF at this time. Although approached by several wrestling promoters, Bollea decided to take some time away from the business and assess what he wanted from his future. Now he had tasted a small amount of stardom, he knew he was hooked. however, has since expressed his uncertainty with the financial viability of becoming a pro wrestler at the time. During Belair's time away, he became the manager of a private club in Florida, where he worked for and formed a close friendship with his boss, Whitey Bridges. The pair started a gym called Olympic Gym and brought in Ed Leslie to help them run the operation. As Ed Leslie and Terry Bollea spent most of their spare time working out in the gym, both men achieved huge physiques and began to formulate a plan to re-enter the pro wrestling world, this time as a hulking tag team. As at the time Ed Leslie had no in-ring training, Bollea promised that if the two men were to travel together, that he would pass on his wrestling knowledge to Leslie, free of charge. The two men began to request a place on the roster of the Alabama Territories, away from their original home turf in Florida, and asked if superstar Billy Graham could help them out, which, as he saw the clear potential of Leslie and Bollea as a pairing, agreed to do. Bollea and Leslie were quickly offered a job by the owner of the Alabama Territory, Louis Tillett. Known by their in-ring name of the Boulder Brothers, Bollea as Terry Boulder and Ed Leslie as Ed Boulder, the two began to work matches for Tillett and were paid $175 each per week. Jerry Jarrett, then promoter for Continental Wrestling Association, booked the Boulder Brothers on his show, where he was seemingly so impressed that after their match, Jarrett offered the men an enormous pay rise of $800 per week each if they came and joined his promotion full time, an offer which was as quickly made by Jarrett as it was swiftly accepted by Bollea and Leslie, who immediately left the employ of Louis Tillett to travel down with Jarrett to Memphis. Throughout the end of 1979, Bollea transitioned away from being a part of a tag team and fought in the ring for Georgia Championship Wrestling under the name of Sterling Golden. Under this moniker, Bollea won several squash matches, but never began to build up any form of momentum from the crowds, who, aside from a few women who can be heard showering Sterling with wolf whistles and screams, gave Bollea a lukewarm reception. When Terry Bollea appeared on a local Memphis chat show, he was interviewed alongside Hollywood actor and famed bodybuilder Lou Ferrigno, a man whose most notable role saw him playing the muscle-clad Incredible Hulk on a much-beloved television show. At this time, Bollea was truly starting to come into his prime as regards to his physical shape. He was tall, shredded and handsome, with striking blue eyes and pumped-up confidence which could see him fill any room with his presence. Next to Bollea, Lou Ferrigno, who was otherwise known for his stature, looked small, leading to a comment from the presenter who discussed the idea that Bollea was indeed the true Hulk. Terry the Hulk Boulder was born, and thus begins the road to Hulkamania. From this point, Hogan frequently referred to his fans as Hulkamaniacs in his interviews and introduced his 3 demandments: training, saying his prayers, and eating his vitamins. Hogan's ring gear developed a characteristic yellow and red colour scheme. His ring entrances involved him ritualistically ripping his shirt off of his body, flexing, and listening for audience cheers in an exaggerated manner. The majority of Hogan's matches during this time involved him wrestling against opponents who had been booked as unstoppable monsters, using a format which became near routine. Hogan would deliver steady offense, but eventually lose momentum, seemingly nearing defeat. After being hit with his opponent's finishing move, he would then experience a sudden second wind, fighting back while feeding off the energy of the audience, becoming impervious to attack, a process now known as hulking up. His signature maneuvers pointing at the opponent, which would later be accompanied by a loud "you" from the audience. Shaking his finger to scold them, 3 punches, an Irish whip, the big boot and the running leg drop would all ensure him a victory. On the leg drop, Hogan said, "When I dropped the leg and nobody kicked out, it meant something. In the arenas nowadays, in professional wrestling, if someone used a leg drop for a finish, you'd probably have to come off the top of the building to get your opponent to stay down." And although many wrestlers before Hulk Hogan had used a variant of a sitting leg drop onto their opponents, there is no doubt that this was the moment that the move really came into the history books of pop culture. He said, "So when I brought it back to the States and I started dropping the leg and the referee started counting, it was like a cannon, 1, 2, 3. So I knew I was onto something, but it was just my luck that I dropped the leg drop in Japan and I got the reaction that I did, so I just stuck with it." The finishing sequence would occasionally change depending on the storyline and opponent. For instance, with giant wrestlers, the sequence might involve a body slam.
Listen up, Hulkamaniacs! I'm taking over Crazy Taxi, so what you gonna do when the power of Hulkamania runs wild on Crazy Taxi?
Whilst working under Jeff Jarrett in the CWA, Hogan met a man who would go on to be his most significant opponent, Andre the Giant. One of the first televised meetings between the pair came in the most unusual of manners. Two hot prospect wrestlers, both with bright futures, finally coming face to face for an epic pro wrestling bout. But no, Andre the Giant and Terry the Hulk Boulder met in an arm wrestling match. Not something that was particularly popular at the time, nor did either character ever proclaim to be a better arm wrestler. It does show a particular type of strength, I suppose, and the CWA did manage to make the event into somewhat of a spectacle for television. The two enormous men, both young and enthusiastic, showed excessive bravado and puffed their chest out before sitting down nice and calmly and aggressively holding hands for a short while. Certainly not the most exciting first face-off for the two great men. Nonetheless, it would set the tone for the next decade, and a rivalry which will go down in the ages as a must-see. Belair was awarded with his first championship belt of his career on December 1st, 1979, after defeating the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight Champion in front of an excitable crowd in Knoxville, Tennessee. Belair's first championship run would come to an end in little over a month, when, in January of 1980, he lost the belt to Bob Armstrong before leaving the company. That same year, industry stalwart Terry Funk was the next man to see the huge potential of Belair's Hulk character. Funk brought Belair and Vincent J. McMahon together for the first time. The boss, McMahon, was supposedly delighted with Hulk's physique and attitude towards the industry in their initial meeting. McMahon suggested the name Hogan to give Hulk an Irish appeal, and from there on out, the name Hulk Hogan stuck and became known by young children and adults alike around the world. One initial idea of Vincent J. McMahon's, which didn't go over as well, was his insistence that the newly deemed Hulk Hogan would dye his hair bright orange in order to cement the racial stereotype that the boss was trying to achieve. Hogan, not certain of his place on the roster at this point, took another risk and stuck to his gut. Hulk Hogan was a fine name in his opinion and has a great and memorable ring to it. However, he was in no way going to dye his head bright orange. By Belair's own admission, his hair was thinning, and the red-orange dye would have been a step too far. Belair argued, "I'll be a blonde Irish person," to which McMahon conceded was acceptable, not wanting to pass on a chance to sign what could potentially be the next big thing in pro wrestling. After signing the necessary contracts, Hulk Hogan had his first match in then WWF, a victory over Harry Valdez in a televised match on November 17th, 1979. A win that would set the tone for the coming trajectory of Hulk Hogan in WWF and beyond. In pro wrestling, there are a small number of venues which are synonymous with the art form. Arenas of glitter-covered combat which have over the last century been host to some of the most iconic moments in the squared circle. The Tokyo Dome has given us hard-fought matches with the likes of Antonio Inoki, the Great Muta, Kazuchika Okada and Hiroshi Tanahashi, which will live long in pro wrestling fans' memories, in front of approximately 55,000 fans who are all there to witness New Japan's biggest event of the year, Wrestle Kingdom. Likewise, a number of athletes have become known for selling out what could be considered the mecca of pro wrestling in the West, Madison Square Garden in New York City. Originally built in 1959, the arena has a maximum capacity of around 20,000. However, with the ring, stage and ramp, wrestling shows are often forced to host many less fans than that at their events. MSG has hosted numerous important sporting events also, including the NBA Finals, as well as a whole host of musical talents. The likes of Elton John, Grateful Dead and Bob Marley have all put on notable shows there. Perhaps with its smaller capacity, the venue doesn't have the overwhelming awe you must feel being privileged enough to obtain a seat at the Tokyo Dome. However, for what MSG gives up in size, it makes up for in its intimate appeal, a sense of real togetherness from the fans in attendance for some of pro wrestling's most historic nights. Bruno Sammartino and Lou Thesz are both names that immediately pop into mind when thinking of Madison Square Garden. The iconic building, located in Midtown Manhattan, the other name which initially comes to mind when thinking of MSG, is Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan made his first appearance at the hallowed arena going up against Ted DiBiase, another match which saw Hogan, the victor after a ferocious bear hug, subdued the $1 Million Man. And as with his initial WWF debut, Hulk Hogan began a lineage of success at MSG, which those in the live audience certainly couldn't have predicted. A few fleeting moments which poof out of existence in a flash, but which now in hindsight seem so significant. Beyond the realm of pro wrestling, this image is still significant. A memorable moment which, even if you can't name which event or match this photo was taken during, you'll recognise both competitors and at the very least have some fuzzy recollection for the images as a whole. The first time Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan came face to face in WWF was in 1980, and the moment, although now in the modern day is worth looking back on, as a moment of inception for a rivalry which would simmer to a boil for years to come, the initial match itself is overshadowed by the fact that the two men came to blows in no less than 16 matches together that year. The rivalry continued to build momentum as Andre, the fan favourite, drew heavy support over the less popular and less well-established Hogan. The pair's 16-match run saw Hogan on a losing streak for the first time in his wrestling career, culminating in a historic match in August of 1980. Hulk Hogan with classy Freddie Blassie at his side versus Andre the Giant at the Shea Stadium is the first major event which saw Hogan body slam Andre, and although there is a more famous body slam to come, up to this point, the body slam at the Shea Stadium was the standout wrestling moment of the time and gave Hulk Hogan a huge step up in terms of notoriety amongst fans and respect amongst his peers. Although during the match, Hogan would eventually lose, it was clear that he had not only given a stellar display of pro wrestling acumen, but also that he indeed kicked out before the referee had counted to 3, meaning of course Hogan never technically lost the match at the Shea Stadium. This led to a confrontation where Hulk Hogan, flanked by his manager, stood toe-to-toe with Andre and demanded a rematch, one which was granted and took place the next week on television. Hogan was at a disadvantage during the bout and resorted to underhanded tactics, attacking Andre with brass knuckles and causing a severe cut to his forehead before fleeing from the match. Over the following months, the two men would continue to be bitter rivals, facing off in a number of similar matches, which saw Hogan cheating and dominating during most of the bout, only to lose by pinfall to Andre at the end. However, before any real conclusion could be drawn for the two men, who had now faced each other almost 20 times, the straight line towards the top for Hulk Hogan, for the first time in WWF, went off course. It was at this time that Hulk Hogan was deemed worthy of an elusive WWF heavyweight title opportunity, one which would see him face off against a man who could not be any further away from Hogan on the pro wrestling spectrum, Bob Backlund. The personification of old school grappling with his no-nonsense attire, pasty white skin and purebred babyface grin on his chubby little chops. No doubt this man was an absolute monster in the ring, but when standing next to the much taller, more colourful and handsomely tanned Hogan, you could see why the McMahons wanted to move the belt to their newest star. However, at this time, Bob Backlund was a well-established champion. He didn't want this new up-and-comer with what Backlund saw as a brash personality and over-the-top looks, taking away his precious belt. This led to the first major altercation for Hulk Hogan with his bosses in WWF. Vince McMahon Sr. and Hulk Hogan had already had an agreement in place for Hogan to win the belt. When Bob Backlund refused and Vince McMahon Sr. decided to hold off on giving Hogan the belt, he left.
Ichiban!
So what do you study today?
Well, I tell you, today is the most exciting day of my wrestling career, simply because I'm the WWF champion 5 times. But the most important thing to me is to make sure that my career ends in Japan. I want to come back to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and I'm back. The IWGP belt is the most important belt in the world today. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday comes again. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday comes again.
綺麗な空気。体には細長が気持ちいいんです。
By 1980, Hulk's popularity had reached new heights, and he began to participate in an initiative which saw current WWF wrestlers travel to Asia to feature on the New Japan Pro Wrestling show. Being a relatively enormous man in comparison to the average man on the Japanese roster, with his bright clothing and gleaming streak of blonde hair, Hogan stood out immediately, earning the moniker Ichiban from the Japanese fans, which translates to number 1. Hogan's first appearance on New Japan television came on May the 13th, 1980, and over the next few years he would spend time sporadically touring around Japan and training with a different crowd of wrestlers. At this time, Hulk Hogan did well to adapt to a more physically demanding style of wrestlers popular in Asia. Up until this point, Hogan had primarily relied on simple front slams, standing suplexes and leg drops in his matches. However, the Japanese audience demanded a more technically advanced moveset from their wrestlers. Hogan took his Japanese counterpart's advice on board and incorporated drop kicks into his matches, and even changed his tried and tested finisher to an axe bomber lariat. His initial run with New Japan included feuds with fellow American Abdullah the Butcher and Japanese legend Tatsumi Fujinami. In 1981, Hulk Hogan was spotted by the casting director for the upcoming film Rocky III when he sought the good wishes of Vincent J. McMahon. They were not given. The father of the current owner of WWE thought that putting such a hot up-and-coming wrestling star in a fictional film could undermine the legitimacy of pro wrestling. After all, in 1980, kayfabe was still alive and well, and most children and even some adults continued to believe in the real-life actions of pro wrestlers in the ring. Vincent J. McMahon was a traditionalist and held huge power in the pro wrestling world. And at this moment, as Belair defied his boss's orders and went to the set to film his now iconic role in Rocky III, Belair's decision must have, to him at least, at the time, like a huge gamble, one that ultimately paid off in the long run. In the film, Belair plays the role of the villain. Thus, when he returned to the ring and made his debut for the AWA in 1980, he was revealed as a vain heel and paired with luscious Johnny Valiant as his equally vain manager. However, after several segments where Belair aimed to get the fans to boo him, his natural charisma and looks had the opposite effect on the crowd. His appearance in a big Hollywood film gave him a sense of star power, and his size helped him to stand out on the mat. Belair soon became a fan favourite and had several memorable run-ins with the likes of Nick Bockwinkel and the Heenan family. By this point, Vince McMahon Jr., Vince J. McMahon's son, stepped up his role after years of learning the inner workings of the wrestling industry, and after a few years as the head honcho, Vince McMahon Jr. had really hit his stride. Purchasing the Capital Wrestling Corporation and WWF from his father, with it assuming complete control of the brand and heading up its new board of decision makers. By the end of 1983, Vincent K. McMahon had picked Hulk Hogan as his main star. He offered Belair a long-term contract fitting in value for that of WWF's new centerpiece. In St. Louis, Missouri in December of 1983, Hulk Hogan returned on screen for WWF in a match where he quickly defeated Bill Dixon and received the fan reaction which both Hogan and McMahon were hoping for.
5 times World Wrestling Federation champion. This belt is just a toy. It's like a trinket on a Christmas tree, like an ornament. The belt that I want is the one that the great Muta has, the IWGP belt. Because when Hulk Hogan wins the IWGP championship, which he should have right now, it will prove that New Japan Pro Wrestling and Hulk Hogan is the greatest partners in the world, because I want all the great wrestlers to come to me, and I want them to come to Japan where I can wrestle.
In both 1982 and 83, the pair came together to overcome their differences and take home the titles in both years of the Madison Square Garden Tag League. But having a successful run as a tag team was not the only moment shared between arguably two of the biggest names in all of pro wrestling history. In 1983, on June the 2nd, Hogan took part in the inaugural International Wrestling Grand Prix and won after defeating the historic Japanese icon Antonio Inoki in the final. Being named as the first ever winner of this tournament saw Hulk Hogan named as the IWGP's first champion and was placed in a position to hold the belt until challenged by next year's Grand Prix winner. Essentially a precursor for the IWGP Heavyweight title, which for many years was considered to be Japan's top belt. At this time, Hogan carried with him the WWF World Heavyweight belt and even defended the championship in 2 occasions in Japan against Seiji Sakaguchi and Fujinami.
The WWF title is just a stepping stone. I want the IWG belt in it. Ichiban!
During this time, Hulk Hogan had become well known for his feud against Inoki in Japan. After their tag team success, the two men were firmly back to being enemies. Hogan had continued to return for spells in Japan whilst under contract with WWF in the US, and had never officially defended his original IWGP title. Antonio Inoki the whole while had become a mainstay on the Japanese wrestling scene, and his company was growing more successful by the day. When Hogan returned to Japan proclaiming his honour and willingness to defend his title, it was so perfectly poetic that Antonio Inoki had just won that year's IWGP and was the only rightful challenger for the American. Although the hype and anticipation was well built up, the final showdown between Hogan and Inoki was ruined by interference by Riki Choshu, which saw Hulk lose via countout, which proved to be a deflating end to this chapter of the story, to say the least. It was during this time that, on December the 18th, 1983, Belair married Linda Claridge, their glamorous wedding taking place in Japan and was quite the media spectacle. Hogan had become somewhat of a celebrity in Asia, and his wedding was even aired on Japanese television. Some of the biggest stars of the wrestling world were in attendance, with the likes of Vincent K. McMahon, Andre the Giant and Antonio Inoki sharing in the festivities. Normally, a performer's personal life is just that. I want to draw a line somewhere when I make these videos and attempt to respect the privacy of the wrestlers whose achievements I aim to document. However, in this case, Hulk Hogan has opened up his life to the world and reaped the rewards of his decision to lay bare his family's dirty secrets. I intend for this video to be as much about Terry Bollea as it is about Hulk Hogan, but I think that the way in which he has chosen to force his way into the public eye and use his family as a means to stay relevant is incredibly telling when we look at why a person may act in such a manner. I think it's important to be able to really understand the mysteries and legends of Hulk Hogan. The wedding in Japan seemed full of joy, love and laughter. There seems to be a genuine sense of happiness for all involved, especially Linda and Terry. It's the start of a personal journey for Hogan and for his family, which has had so many tumultuous highs and lows. It's impossible not to see their over-the-top star-studded wedding, in hindsight, as an encapsulation of everything that went wrong with the man behind the character.
For all my Hulkamaniacs that have stuck with me through the thick and thin, train, said their prayers, and eat their vitamins, be a survivor, man. Don't smoke, it's a joke.
By January of 1984, Hogan had officially made the confirmed change from bad guy to good when he fought off the Wild Samoans and saved his then rival, Bob Backlund. After surviving the onslaught, Backlund declared about Hogan, "He's changed his ways, he's a great man, he's told me he's not going to have Blassie around," which was also confirmation that Hogan would finally split from his heel manager in Classy Freddie Blassie another clear indication of Hogan's new noble intentions. Backlund indeed had survived the attack by the Wild Samoans, however, he would not be fit to compete in his upcoming match, a title match which the fans had been looking forward to. The two men would face off at Madison Square Garden on an evening when the arena was filled with anticipation. The crowd booed as before the match, Iron Sheik revealed his new manager to be none other than Freddie Blassie, which really added a level of hatred to the feud. During the match, Hogan's task was clear. He must evade the Sheik's deadly camel clutch. After all, the Iron Sheik had won the majority of his recent matches with his version of the vicious submission. More importantly, up until this point, nobody had survived being caught in the camel clutch. Hogan began in the match to ascend. He began on a path which would see him becoming almost immortal within the confines of the ring ropes. After a leg drop on the 1-2-3, commentator Gorilla Monsoon proclaimed, "Hulkamania is here." Hulk Hogan was confirmed as the new king of WWF, and as the fans in attendance exploded with delight, so, with his first WWF championship around his waist, in the United States, Hulk Hogan was now strapped to the proverbial rocket and destined for the moon. Back in America, and Hogan was causing friction once again.
Okay, Maniacs, here we go.
However, this time it was with a giant, angry superhero. As Hulk Hogan's notoriety grew, so did his ability to sell merchandise and earn money from his name. This is where Marvel comes in. They were frustrated by Hulk Hogan's apparent infringement of their Incredible Hulk character and sought compensation. Before the issue could go to court, Marvel Comics, Hulk Hogan and the WWF came to a financial agreement which saw Marvel receive 0.9% of reportable gross merchandise revenue associated with Hogan, $100 for each of his matches, and 10% of WWF's portion of his other earnings under this name. Marvel also obtained the commercial rights to the names Hulk Hogan, Hulkster and Hulkamania for 2 decades. Hogan was no longer permitted to be called Incredible or Hulk. He was also banned from wearing the colours purple and green. There is even a comic from 1988, Marvel Comics Presents number 45, where the Incredible Hulk becomes enraged and picks up a wrestler in one scene, only to sling them brutally from a high-up platform. The reason given on the other page is that he picked the wrong name. Soon after, in 1983, at the annual meeting of the National Wrestling Alliance, Vince McMahon Jr. or Vince K. McMahon backed out of his commitments and cut ties with the NWA, which understandably angered the other promoters and started huge rivalries between the WWF and the NWA territories, and as the WWF sought to run shows across the whole country, this became a major issue. WWF and Vince K. McMahon used this new wider coverage to leverage deals with advertisers and larger television companies. This afforded the WWF a bankroll which would allow them to continue their acquisition of new talent and go on to headhunt the best performers in the business. A true golden age of pro wrestling. The world was changed forever as soon as the ink had dried on McMahon's ownership contract, taking the WWF as a regional promotion and using the existing platform to create industry icons and pop culture figures such as Rowdy Roddy Piper, Andre the Giant and Mr. Perfect, all of whom had previous relationships with the AWA and NWA. In 1984, Vince McMahon believed that WWF were ready to take their next step on their journey of conquest of the United States wrestling scene. Vince and his wife Linda put their savings and everything they had into promoting WWF and pro wrestling's biggest show in decades, setting WWF apart from the NWA at the time, who themselves had been promoting NWA Starrcade in years previous as their main show of the year. On March 31st of 1985, WWF's Wrestlemania aired from Madison Square Garden in New York, the spiritual home of the WWF, and premiered live on MTV. A partnership known as the Rock and Wrestling Connection proved extremely fruitful for all involved, with WWF promoting the event as a supercard, inviting the likes of Muhammad Ali, Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper and Liberace to participate in the groundbreaking event. Wrestlemania was the first ever pro wrestling pay-per-view and saw the inception of a business model for WWF that would evolve and adapt all the way until the modern day. Hogan's inclusion in the main event was a given. The show was designed in part to be built around Hulkamania. Vince McMahon saw a perfect chance to bring more eyes to their inaugural show with the inclusion of the aforementioned celebrities. Hogan would appear in a tag match paired with actor Mr. T in a match which included Liberace and Muhammad Ali as the ringside officials. Hogan and Mr. T defeated the heel team of Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. A tag match which, although not the best produced or fondly remembered match, is still incredibly important in the overall timeline of wrestling, marking a turning point in the industry towards the rock and wrestling era. WWE's first foray into the world of animation came back in 1985 during the period of interconnection between the wrestling business and the world of celebrity. Designed, animated and produced by the creative team over at DIC Animation City, originally a French company who had recently moved their operations to Burbank, California. DIC Animation had proved themselves with the creation of other animated series, Inspector Gadget and The Real Ghostbusters, both of which showed themselves to be popular. As DIC and the WWF at the time came together to generate potential ideas for their new cartoon, it was clear that the over-the-top and wildly adventurous type of cartoon that was popular in the mid-1980s would naturally be a great fit. Taking the core ideas of good versus evil, the cartoon would feature the current wrestling roster and their likenesses paired into either the heel or face camp for the purposes of making each character more easily recognisable to a younger audience. The titular Hulk Hogan led the heroes, which featured icons of the time such as Junkyard Dog, Captain Lou Albano, Andre the Giant, Wendy Richter, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Hillbilly Jim and Tito Santana. Roddy Piper was the leader of the opposition, with his ragtag group of heels, which included the Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, the Fabulous Moolah, Big John Studd, and Mr. Fuji. Before watching the show, I was excited to see how these iconic characters would translate to the 2D. The list of names mentioned previously reads like a who's who of 1980s pro wrestling, with a host of the biggest names attached. As someone who was born in 1991, I never lived through this time period, so looking back there was always a mysterious fog which accompanied any memory of 80s wrestling. However, as soon as I watched episode 1, I knew I wouldn't be hearing much about the real-life characters through their cartoon counterparts. It was clear that the voices, which are so recognisable to so many, were not the same in rock and wrestling. I looked it up and, indeed, these characters were voiced by a talented selection of voice actors, replicating the pro wrestlers' famous phrases with varying degrees of success. Several of the real wrestlers did appear during the several live segments featured throughout the show, but it would have been a logistical nightmare to attempt to design, write, animate and produce rock and wrestling while simultaneously attempting to get 10 or so of the wrestlers into the recording booth to record the lines, which were intentionally meant to air alongside the stories from within the ring in WWF at the time. When the idea for rock and wrestling was originally pitched, it featured a principle which in concept sounds brilliant. The showrunners for the cartoon would be given small amounts of information from WWE, things about storylines beforehand, enabling them to go through the creation process and have the actions performed by the characters in their animation reflect those of their real-life counterparts on the live-action WWE shows. A way to build more audience connection to the characters on the screen, whilst also bringing in a new set of fans who watch the cartoons and gain an interest in watching more WWF products. However, in reality, the production times for the cartoon ended up overrunning what was initially expected during the planning phase. Added to the unpredictable nature of real life, meant that several key figures that were featured prominently in the animation, such as Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Wendy Richter, had in fact left the WWF in early 1985, just in time for DIC Animations to write them into the show, design and animate their characters, and have a pair of voice actors record all of their lines. It wasn't within the budget to remake these sections with other wrestlers, and thus they remained in Rock and Wrestling long after their departures. Roddy Piper, the leader of the bad guys in the cartoon, was an evil villain on WWF television when the animation first aired. However, he changed his ways in WWF and was firmly a good guy by the time Rock and Wrestling was only halfway through finishing all of their aired episodes, including the entirety of Season 2. The exact opposite happened with Andre the Giant, and thus you can see that the effort of creating cohesive stories that intertwined between the cartoon and real life was seemingly fruitless. So, the idea was quickly dropped as the rest of the episodes were created. Most of Rock and Wrestling's stories as you watch through them, surprisingly, have very little to do with wrestling. The show becomes more of a fun telling of some silly stories which just happen to involve heroes who are pro wrestlers and the villains the same. Almost none of the entire 2-series run takes place in a wrestling ring, and there aren't very many wrestling moves shown in a traditional sense. This is something that was entirely unexpected as I sat down to watch the series for the first time. But as I made my way through all of the episodes, it wasn't something which I felt ruined the program in any way. The structure of each episode is incredibly easy to digest. Some of them have stories which take place over the full 25-ish minutes runtime, and some episodes are split into 2 parts to tell 2 12-minute long stories. Both formats work to make the entire 26-episode run fly by. We can't have a program called Rock and Wrestling which features wrestling, but no rock. The cartoon regularly featured a recurring segment which showed the music video for the song Land of a Thousand Dances, which was a track from the album creatively titled The Wrestling Album. Notable for its inclusion of several famous wrestling faces singing and dancing, including Lou Albano, King Kong Bundy, Bret Hart, and the Fabulous Moolah. The introduction theme for Rock and Wrestling was created by Jim Steinman, and was liked so much by the production staff and wrestlers alike, it went on to be used as real-life Hulk Hogan's entrance theme for a while in WWF, before he transitioned to his much more famous Real American theme. Jim Steinman's work on the track would not be lost to time, however, as later he would rework the Rock and Wrestling music, then known as Hulk Hogan's theme, and turn it into a track called Ravishing, which featured on Bonnie Tyler's 1986 album Secret Dreams and Forbidden Fire. In the modern day, WWE owns the rights to Rock and Wrestling and have featured the full 2-series run since 2015 on the WWE network, if you indeed wanted to check it out for yourself. I wouldn't by any stretch say that this cartoon, which originally was created for children, is a must-watch. It simply isn't. The jokes can fall pretty flat, some of the writing is cringe-inducingly out of date, and the characters are mostly one-dimensional versions of already inflated egos from pro wrestling. If you like great cartoons and anime, there are plenty of other places to go to get your fix of exciting and entertaining 2D. If you like pro wrestling, then unfortunately, past the fact that the cast is made up of facsimiles of real-life pro wrestlers, you won't be getting much in-ring action from Rock and Wrestling. But if you're like me, you're a fan of both animation, silly humour and pro wrestling of the past, then this little 1980s time capsule is full of moments which allow you to sit back and enjoy the warm nostalgic fuzz of a bygone era and a simpler time in the world of children's entertainment. Hogan continued on with his run of high-profile victories within WWF. The next year, at the sequel to Wrestlemania, Vince McMahon wanted to go even bigger than the previous year, so for Wrestlemania 2, the event was split across 3 venues. The Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum in New York, the Rosemont Horizon in Illinois, and the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena in LA. Each separate event was put on simultaneously, with the roster being divided into 3 individual cards. The televised event would flip between the 3, with each venue hosting its own co-main event. Mr. T fought in a boxing match against Roddy Piper, a tag title match, and the real main event of the evening, Hulk Hogan defeating King Kong Bundy inside of a steel cage to retain his World Heavyweight Championship. Arguably, none have made more of an impact on popular culture around the world of pro wrestling for better and for worse, than Hulk Hogan. By this point in his career, Hulk Hogan had become a household name across the US and was well known in Japan and Europe too. A man who managed to monetize almost all aspects of his life, from his family's very own reality show to lending his likeness and name to a whole host of terrible and poorly thought out products and services.
You wanna be in my game, my game, my game, wanna be in my game. Oh, yeah.
Aside from pro wrestling and drama, one other constant through Belair's life has been his love for music. His time spent practicing and touring the local area in his teens had left him with a desire to pursue his musical dreams, long after he hung up his guitar and traded it in for some wrestling boots. Talking of boots, in 1985, Hogan formed another band, this time named Hulk Hogan and the Wrestling Boot Band, which featured longtime friend Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart, his then wife Linda, and collaborator JJ Maguire. The quartet, fronted by Hogan, released a CD titled Hulk Rules. The 10-track album, which mixes in terrible renditions of pop, rock and even some rap, featured such classic and memorable hits as Hulkster's in the House, Hulkster's Back, Hulk's the One, Hulkster in Heaven and Hulk Rules. I think it's fairly obvious what the focus of the band was, simply to fulfill the musical dreams of said Hulkster and provide a platform to further grow his fame outside of pro wrestling. Now this one's pretty sad. In the only song in which Hogan sings on the album, called Hulkster in Heaven, the themes revolve around a young Hulk Hogan fan who died. The lyrics, according to Hogan's autobiography, were written to honour a boy who had attended a WWF show at Wembley in 1992. To see his favourite wrestler Hogan, but sadly, he passed away before the end of the event. In his autobiography, Hogan writes, "He was supposed to be sitting ringside, but I went out to wrestle and I didn't see him there. After the match, I came back and said, 'Where's the kid?' They told me, 'Oh, he died before the match got underway.'" Hogan goes on to say that immediately following the terrible news, he and Jimmy Hart went backstage and began to write the lyrics to Hulkster in Heaven as a way of dealing with the trauma, and had the idea to give the proceeds from the song to the family of the deceased boy, who Hogan explained were dealing with medical costs, something which may have led to his untimely death. The lyrics of the song show Hogan's pain when he sings, "I wish Hulk's love could bring you back. When the Hulkster comes to heaven, we'll tag up again." And the emotional lines, "I used to tear my shirt, but now you tore my heart. I knew you were a Hulkamaniac right from the start." The death of a child can affect families and friends who may never overcome the sadness of their loss. A truly dark and emotional tale, I'm sure you agree. The fact that Hogan went above and beyond to help out financially is, in my opinion, is a real act of honour in my books. Or it would be. If any of what I just told you is true, in 1992, WWF put on several shows at Wembley in London, none of which featured Hulk Hogan in any capacity at all. Furthermore, JJ Maguire has dispelled these lies, explaining how he wrote the song with Hogan in 1994, 2 years after this story is supposed to have taken place. We don't even pay for our medical expenses in the UK, so what was all the medical bills that he was giving the money to the kid to pay for? Hulk didn't wrestle at Wembley in 1992, he didn't meet a sickly fan before the match, who later sadly died, and he didn't give any of the proceeds from the album to anyone except those in the band and, of course, himself. He lied to make himself look better and to make more money, and he did it at the expense of the feelings of families who have lost a loved one. It's that simple. The Hulk Rules album was a critical flop upon its release, but it has since gone on to become something of a collector's item and cult classic amongst wrestling fans. The track American Made would go on to become Hulk Hogan's entrance theme during his time in WCW and is probably the most fondly remembered tune from the album. The pro wrestling website WrestleCrap criticises the album, saying, "The Hulkster's in the house and invading your eardrums with the force of a Class A killstorm. Highlights include every song mentioning Hogan by name, no egotism here, and Jimmy Hart singing with a clothespin on his nose." Hogan, however, did not allow this lukewarm response to his music to slow him down. He performed a duet with Green Jelly, a cover of the ill-fated I'm the Leader of the Gang Gary Glitter track, a song which, due to the nature of the events surrounding its original creator, would much rather be lost to the annals of time by all involved in this cover version. Hulk Hogan has also appeared throughout the years in several music videos where he has not lent his musical talents but rather his celebrity personality. He portrayed Starlight Starbright in a wrestling-themed love ballad by Dolly Parton named Headlock on My Heart, which is a personal favourite of mine. A brief story which featured the love of a fictional wrestler and a fan who buys a ticket to his wrestling matches to sit in the front row. Before the pair fall in love, and we're treated to the most 1980s pro wrestling moment of all time, when Dolly Parton and Hulk Hogan are married inside of a WWF wrestling ring. All the time, Hulk Hogan is wearing the most glorious sleeveless tuxedo and giving us at home the wink of a lifetime. This song was featured on Dolly Parton's TV show and seems like everyone involved had a lot of fun making it. I'm a secret Dolly Parton mark, and seeing two worlds collide like this brought a wide smile to my face. Hogan has also appeared in a multitude of other music videos. His connection with MTV during the rock and wrestling era meant that he had connections with those who were making the videos at the time. The musical bug may run in the family for Hogan. His daughter Brooke has released 3 poorly received pop albums with their very own music videos. To be honest, it always felt to me like Brooke Hogan was simply living off the success of her family name, able to attempt to create marketable music with little to no skill, purely by her father's money and influence. I'm sorry if you like this kind of music. Who am I to tell you what to like? I'm a pro wrestling fan after all, I clearly have no taste. But going back, Brooke's musical career, which seemed to have ended in 2017, when she released her last single, toes the line somewhere between High School Musical, pep rally fodder, and Pussycat Dolls' heavy breathing and reliance on catchiness to sell an album. Truly horrid stuff. Hogan even got called out during a diss track by former friend and wrestling ally Macho Man Randy Savage, who rapped the lyrics to the song Be a Man, which include, "Be a man, Hulk, come on, don't be scared, you're running from Macho Man, that's what I heard." Doesn't really rhyme, does it? I don't know why 2 balding men in their 40s are arguing via the medium of rap, but I would have loved to have seen a freestyle battle between the two back in 2003. Hulk Hogan has made millions of dollars through selling his likeness in order for companies, big and small, to sell a product. Putting a muscle-clad fitness icon on your advertisements for vitamins and supplements seems like a perfect fit, and something which I never have an issue with. A recommendation on health foods from a man who has spent most of his life training and staying in shape seems pretty sensible, right? I can even see the connection between beauty and hygiene products. Say what you will about Hulk Hogan, but that man stays fresh, no doubt in my mind. But would you seriously consider taking advice about your credit score from this?
Don't let bills blur your vision, brother.
Do you want to consolidate all of your monthly loan repayments into one simple, affordable monthly payment?
I have a solution. 1-800-LOAN-MART, brother.
Do you want a TV?
God, Troy, dude. What did we talk about?
Perhaps I could interest you in some other kinds of electronics. Maybe a paper towel.
Professional wrestler Hulk Hogan.
Or a fucking chicken cordon bleu. Sorry, cordon bleu.
Brother, I was at Arby's scarfing down a chicken cordon bleu.
And that brings us to the wonderful and wacky combination of one of the 1980s and 90s most over-the-top and beloved superstars. And food. To get this big, you need to eat big. So I'm sure Hulk Hogan knows a thing or two about eating food. Aside from music and wrestling, Terry Bollea always expressed an interest in running a small beachside cafe someday, something which he would later go on to achieve. However, the beginning of this culinary journey goes way back to the Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota. In 1985, Pasta Mania was running wild as Hulk brought in a team to create pasta-based dishes and sell the dishes such as Hulkaroos and Hulk U's, both of which I've got absolutely no idea what they refer to. The only Hulkaroos here is the ruse that this restaurant was anything other than incredibly low quality food sold at a hugely marked up price, because While you and your stupid kid were eating your Hulk-flavoured pasta sauce, you could look up and see an enormous picture of Hulk Hogan with a yellow and red chef's outfit. Notice you never actually see Hogan eating the pasta? I wonder why. Although Pastamania was widely publicised with the help of WCW at the time, the restaurant was inevitably a complete failure and closed within a year of opening. Later, while talking to Conan O'Brien on The Tonight Show, Hogan spoke of how he was invited to be the face of a new grilling product, but had taken too mumuch time to respond to the offer and wasn't interested. That grill later went on to be represented by famous ex-boxer George Foreman and became somewhat of a household must-have for a while, making Foreman huge amounts of money, all of which Hogan admits could have been his. But no fret, Hogan wasn't disappointed. He signed a deal that would go on to be even bigger than that of the George Foreman grill, something which would make even more money and be an even bigger success. No, I'm just kidding. Hulk Hogan became the face of the Hulk Hogan Thunder Mixer, a food processor which nobody bought and nobody outside of wrestling fans would probably even remember.
Hi guys, welcome back. Bob and I just showed you how my Ultimate Grill replaced over $1,200 worth of professional kitchen appliances.
Hogan did go on to eventually get his name slapped on the box for a grill, confidently named the Hulk Hogan Ultimate Grill. It turned out, to nobody's surprise, in fact not to be the Ultimate Grill and stopped production soon after its launch. Don't forget about Hogan Energy from 2006, a delicious energy drink which was distributed by Socko Energy in the US but never proved popular enough to continue production. Head to Walmart for all your delicious processed, pre-packaged microwavable Hulkster burgers. You even have a choice of antibiotic chicken flavour, hamburgers which are neither ham nor burger, or a cheeseburger, the composition of which is yet to be identified by the science community. Yum. One thing that is great is when somebody achieves their lifetime goal. It's cool that Hogan wanted to be by the beach, relaxing and being around food and people. In 2012 on New Year's Eve, Hogan's Beach restaurant was opened in Tampa, Florida, and seemingly Hogan enjoyed his time there, so good for him. During controversies with Hogan's private life being made public, his name and association with Hogan's Beach restaurant was removed in 2015. This led to the opening of another restaurant in an area near Clearwater Beach called Hogan's Hangout, which seems to be where Hogan spent most of his time up until this day. A place to sell his food as well as a host of memorabilia and merchandise from the Hulkster. Which takes me to my next topic. You all know how important merchandise sales are to pro wrestlers who can supplement their income via the direct support of their fans. Merchandise sales are something I can really get behind as a way of supporting your favourite in-ring performer. But like so many other aspects of Hulk Hogan's life, this man took it to the next fucking level. From his peak in the 1980s until the modern day, there is barely an object which has yet to be branded in red and yellow or slapped with a big Hulkamania sticker. You think I'm joking? Well, how about this plushy Hogan head bopper toy for children to punch? Or this sweater with this design? How about a set of fruit juice drinks, or perhaps this handy Hulk Hogan lunchbox? What about this Hulk Hogan decorative light switch, or this weirdly creepy chair? Want to sit on Hulk Hogan's lap? Well, now you can. Take some selfies in this hilarious Hulk Hogan mask. You can see how out of control it's gotten. Every last one of these products is cheap tat, mostly made of harmful plastic, which were pumped out in their hordes and shipped out to unsuspecting idiots like me who gobbled it all up as a kid and are left with part of their house full of pro wrestling faces just staring back at you. Wow, sorry, that really got away from me. Hulk Hogan was so famous at a point that anything with his likeness or name would sell better than without the celebrity endorsement. He made so much money through his own ventures outside of pro wrestling that it gave him the power and confidence to take control of his own destiny within the grappling business. Because, unlike so many we see perform within the squared circle who don't have any other option than pro wrestling to make money, Hulk Hogan was fortunate enough to take the platform he was given by WWF and turn himself into a multi-millionaire. And although we may judge these decisions, Can you say that you wouldn't have done the same given the chance to make so much money for such relatively easy work? I don't know if I could. But now back to the timeline. Through all the distractions of record label contracts and merchandise deals, Hulk Hogan still managed to rise to the occasion and brought forward some of the most entertaining and emotive promos of his career in 1987. In the build-up to what would be WWF's third WrestleMania show, Hulk Hogan had been the WWF champion for 3 years, and on an episode of Piper's Pit was presented with an award by President Jack Tunney. Fans began to wonder if the Giant was having ideas about taking the belt from his friend. The next week, as Roddy Piper this time welcomed Andre onto his segment to present him with a trophy for being undefeated in WWF for 15 years, a totally made-up achievement, it became clear that Andre's trophy was a lot smaller in stature than the one that Hulk Hogan had recently been presented with, a fact made all the worse by Hulkster coming out to congratulate Andre on his success, only to completely take over the interview and put the spotlight on himself. Something which, in the storyline, isn't a particularly nice thing for a heroic character to do. But as we see later on in Hogan's career, he's an expert at keeping himself in the limelight at the expense of others. After a few more weeks of back and forth, where fans were left confused as to both men's intentions, Andre arrived on the set for another episode of Piper's Pit, but this time with Bobby Heenan as his manager, long-time nemesis of Hogan. Heenan challenged Hogan to put his WWF title on the line, and Andre grabbed at Hogan, ripping off his shirt and breaking his necklace. After more meetings and promos between Heenan, Hogan and Andre, the three men did an excellent job of building up the story of betrayal from Andre and creating a man who was once a beloved babyface and turning him into an evil heel for Hogan to clash with. On March 29th, at the Pontiac Silverdome in front of a disputed 93,000 fans, one of the most significant moments in the whole of pro wrestling occurred. At WrestleMania 3, in one of the most iconic moments of Hogan's career, Hulk Hogan swept Andre the Giant off of his feet and slammed the behemoth right into the annals of sports entertainment legend. And although the moment is seared into most grappling fans' memories, the historic match was actually won when Hogan came crashing down onto Andre the Giant with his finisher, the leg drop. Regardless of the exact details of how the match was finished or how it was remembered, one thing is for certain, that at WrestleMania 3, Hulk Hogan went from being a star to becoming a superstar. The true highest form of Hulkamania was achieved, and fans around the world who weren't already believers in the three demandments were converted in their droves. The moment of the slam was shown on news television and garnered attention and parody from filmmakers and pro wrestlers alike for decades to come. A moment of pure excitement and jubilation, the likes of which pro wrestling can be so good at delivering. Everything just landed right, and the combination of elements that went into making this match, and indeed Hulkamania in general, are so rare that this type of mass appeal has only ever been reached by a number of athletes in the entire history of the squared circle.
We're seeing what this guy is really made of. Why, he is the greatest professional athlete in the world today. Look at this. He's slammed it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Oh, dropping a big leg. Over for the cover. It's over. Unbelievable.
Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, be true to yourself, true to your country, be a real American. Whew.
Say my prayers. Eat my vitamins. Our brother, who is Hulk Hogan, hallowed be thy name. Thy ring doth come, thy will be done, as you slammed Andre at WrestleMania 3. Give us this day our daily leg drop, and forgive us jabronis, as we forgive those who are jabronis against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from Papa Shango and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, which is Hulkamania. Hulkamania. Hulkamania.
You shouldn't have come here, brother. You don't know what Hulkamania is really about. What you gonna do? Brother. Hulkamania's running wild. 24-inch pythons. The whole world thought that the referee was paid off. Just because the world title is held in limbo doesn't mean that Hulkamania doesn't live. I'm no different than I was before, man.
Let me tell you something, Jack. If you want the truth, then you don't have to look any further than these two 24-inch pythons and this baseball mitt fist. But you know what they say about the truth? The truth hurts, and it'll hurt even more when I have the power of my 100 billion Hulkamaniacs, and also the power of my vitamins. So what you gonna do, brother, when Hulkamania runs wild on you?
Wrestling is weird. Yeah. And also, isn't that guy a racist? Like, said the N-word during a sex tape that he made with his best friend's wife? Right? Am I right?
At this point, Hulk Hogan was a financial success. He was incredibly famous and well liked, and he had maintained his position atop the mountain of WWF for years. But, as we'll soon find out, good times don't always last, and the glory years of this once magnificent warrior of triumph and honour will come crashing to his knees.
Okay, joining us is the World Wrestling Federation champion, the cause of Hulkmania, Mr. Hulk Hogan.
The first thing you need to know about amateur wrestling, yes, or professional wrestling or submission holds, you just tell me, brother, when you want him to quit squealing, okay? All right. It's called a front chin lock. How about it, T?
Keep him like that for a little while. Because he's all right, he's just sleeping. He's sleeping.
In 1990, Terry Bollea was caught up in a New York Supreme Court case, one which was front-page news and questioned the very reality of pro wrestling and its dangers. At this time, Hogan was one of the most famous men in America. Pro wrestling had gone through an enormous boom period, and as the face of the company, it was impossible to deny Hulk as anything less than a household name. As such, he regularly appeared outside of the WWF, promoting upcoming events on talk shows. One such appearance came on the Hot Properties show, hosted by Richard Besler.
Hulk Hogan is 6'8" or 6'9". He weighs 329 pounds. I'm 6'1", I weigh 150. Right. Newsweek magazine called me the pencil arm comedian, so I'll be subscribed. Now Hogan walks in like he just sat on a rhino. You know, it's like he has so many steroids that he's like perverted the very idea what it is to be human. You know, it's like Macy's Day Parade. He just came out like this, and he comes over to me, grabs my hand, and he goes, "How you doing, dude? You're a real funny dude. I like you, dude."
A man whose act had recently been reviewed by the New York Times in what now, after what we're about to discuss, seems rather ominous. There is a nervous unpredictability about Belzer's act. He himself seems to be never quite sure what he will pounce on next. The result can be unsettling, but fascinating and sometimes very funny. Hogan was joined on the show by then tag team partner in training, Mr. T, who were present to promote their upcoming match at Wrestlemania 1 in 1985.
Getting ready for March 31st, Wrestlemania.
Wrestlemania.
the host Belzer was known to make fun of his guests in order to open them up for a better conversation. This show would prove no different, as he mocked the realism of pro wrestling and insisted that if Hogan and Mr. T were legitimate fighters, they would have no issue with showing him a few moves. Belzer's brash attitude was clearly a little too confrontational for Mr. T, whilst Hogan seemed calm and collected throughout. "We ain't showing you nothing," Mr. T said. "You want to see some moves? You get a closed circuit ticket."
Why don't you guys, I want you to show me some
No, we ain't showing you nothing.
moves.
You didn't come here to show no moves, man, you know. We didn't come
I'm
to show no
talking to
moves,
him,
you know.
man, okay?
But Belzer wouldn't take no for an answer, picking at the topic several times before Hogan relented. "I'm going to stick to the basics, because the floor's a little hard there and I don't want to get you hurt," Hogan explained in yet more ominous foreshadowing. Sports Illustrated explained the Hulk put Belzer in a front chinlock, whereupon Belzer was rendered null and void, almost permanently. Belzer slumped to the floor unconscious, waking up moments later in a pool of his own blood. With the host knocked out unconscious on the floor, his manager, Tom Leopold, runs onto the set and attempts to keep the show going. "It was an accident," Leopold said.
Richard was hurt. It was an accident. Hulk didn't mean to do it.
Hulk didn't mean to do it. These things happen on television, and now I think Hulk and T should just talk about this kind of thing, how it can happen and how to avoid it. Hot Properties cut to a commercial break, and upon its return, Hulk Hogan, in a show of true professionalism and with the gravest of looks on his face, explained to the audience the dangers of pro wrestling and the injuries that it can cause.
Richard asked me to demonstrate a professional wrestling hold, and that's exactly what I did. I put what is called a front chin lock on the man, and when I released him, he fell and hit his head on the floor.
Belzer, who received 8 stitches on his head, called the incident vicious and sickening, then placed a full-page ad in the New York Post announcing it would be replayed 5 nights later, just in case anybody hadn't been sufficiently grossed out the first time. Richard Belzer then sued Terry Bollea and attempted to take the case to New York Supreme Court. Before the case went to trial, the pair settled for an undisclosed fee. Belzer used the money to buy a ranch and named it Shea Hogan, in honour of the man who he said had bought it for him. "My wife and I put down a payment on a house in France," he later said on the windfall he received.
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? He's Hulk Hogan. You don't get to be Hulk Hogan without knowing how to work the game.
I want to look at why, with such a legitimately impressive and almost unmatched history within the pro wrestling business, with so many excellent stories to tell and achievements to be proud of, does Terry Bollea seem to always crave more? Jim Cornette said, "Wrestling is all about good lies and bad lies. The bad lies come from the bookers, the promoters, and the people that underhandedly wanted people to do stuff that might not be in their best interest because they wanted them to do it. The good lies are all the stories that the guys used to tell in the locker room when they'd walk in, because that's all you had to do. You didn't have a TV in the locker room, there was no cell phone, there was no internet. You sat and stared at each other's Peters and told ridiculous stories." Hogan was at the peak of his popularity after slamming Andre in the main event of WrestleMania 3, but that success had come at a huge cost for both the men involved. Hogan said, "When I wrestled Andre the Giant at the time, he was standing 7'4" and weighed over 800 pounds. When I slammed him, I tore every muscle in my lower back." And Andre died a few days after the match. Two men given it their all, with one goal in mind: to entertain us as wrestling fans and leave us with a moment which will stand out in our memories for a lifetime. All the while, Hogan was put out of action for a year due to the horrific injuries in his back, and Andre had suffered such brutal internal damage from the first ever body slam he received that 6 days later he sadly passed away. There's just one problem. none of what Hogan said here is true. Not only was it not the first time Andre the Giant had been body slammed, but it wasn't even the first time Hogan had achieved the feat. It wasn't even the first time Hulk had slammed Andre that month, as the pair had faced off in several practice matches at untelevised house shows in preparation for the big event. Andre didn't ever weigh 800 pounds, even at his heaviest, and by WWF at the time was billed at 500 pounds, which is still probably a dramatisation. But even if not, still 300 pounds short of how Hulk remembers the moment. And, I think most disturbingly, Andre didn't die shortly after WrestleMania 3. Well, in terms of the length of the universe perhaps, but I don't think that's what Hulk was referring to. Andre the Giant lived for 6 more years after WrestleMania 3, and I'm not too sure why Hogan would lie about this specific point. Was it to make his body slam seem all the more devastating? Was he implying that he brought about the downfall of a man who he claimed was his close friend? Continued his feud throughout the year with Andre, the pair both forfeiting a match for the WWF title when they attempted to use chairs to attack one another. Andre eventually beat Hogan for the belt via underhanded tactics and immediately handed the belt to Ted DiBiase in return for a large chunk of cash. This was seen as an unacceptable move for the new WWF champion, and thus the belt became vacant, with a tournament to be held to crown a new top man in the company. Andre versus Hogan had happened earlier in the night. Yes, but if you look in their eyes, man, have you seen the fear in all those little Hulksters? They realise that when I get Andre the Giant cinched up in a launch position, when I slam him through the Trump Plaza, brother, from New York down to Tampa, Florida, the fault line is going to break off. Even with Randy Savage in the main event, Hogan seemingly needed to still be the lasting image of the show, the man who closed out the final moments of the event and was still to be seen as the headliner, who typically goes on last. Hogan, along with Andre, were the two men featured on the event's poster and subsequent covers of the VHS release, but seemingly this still wasn't enough for Hogan. It's the main event of the evening, the shining pinnacle of Randy Savage's career, glitter, neon, Miss Elizabeth, the works. After making his way through the tournament for the vacant WWF title, Randy Savage faced off against Ted DiBiase in the final. A new hero for the fans to get behind. What could possibly spoil this perfectly orchestrated moment of classic wrestling history? Hogan. He comes to the ring, jumps in to aid Randy Savage with a steel chair, steals the limelight as always, and takes away from what could have been the most important moment in the whole of the Macho Man's lineage. After his victory, Hogan stays in the ring to celebrate with Savage and Miss Elizabeth in what was supposed to be their moment. And as Hogan seemingly refused to share the spotlight with anyone, you can see the disappointment on Savage's face. Also, as an aside, according to Hogan, Andre died shortly after his slam at WrestleMania 3 the previous year, right? So who was the giant in the ring opposite the Hulkster this year? A spooky mystery which nobody will ever truly get to the bottom of, or simply a lie. You decide. Next year, 1989, Hogan needed a way to stay at the top of the wrestling card. He and Randy Savage were both faces, so he couldn't win the belt directly off of him. Under the rules of kayfabe booking at the time, Savage wasn't dropping the title anytime soon, so Hulk forced his creative control card and created the Mega Powers, a tag team with Hogan and Savage, thus keeping Hogan in the main event each night next to the title and relevant. All great moves for his business, but all this did was overshadow Randy Savage, take away from his attention and force Hogan's way onto the screen anytime Randy was around, something that seemed to be a regular occurrence throughout the two men's careers. Throughout the year, the Mega Powers were the most popular segment on any WWF show, and for good reason. Both Hogan and Savage were in the prime of their careers, and their intensity and chemistry on screen made every single appearance a must-see. The pair spent the year facing off and defeating heel tag teams, whilst also participating in their own personal feuds as singles competitors. Randy Savage's longtime valet and real-world wife got caught in the middle. Hogan began to insist that she accompanied him to the ring for his matches, which began to brew jealousy from Savage. When on several occasions Miss Elizabeth was ringside supporting Hogan, she was put in danger, something which the Macho Man blamed entirely on his Mega Powers teammate. In February, during a tag match, Savage was thrown from the ring and awkwardly landed on Miss Elizabeth, causing her apparent serious injuries. Before he could regain his composure, Hogan had swooped in and came to the aid of the fallen valet, carrying her to the backstage area where she received medical attention. Savage believed it was his duty to care for his spouse and that Hogan had overstepped the line. With the Macho Man left in the ring to now take on two opponents, Hogan continued to loom over the unconscious Miss Elizabeth backstage. When she finally awoke, she implored Hulk to return to the ring and aid her husband Randy Savage. However, clearly furious at what had just happened, as Hogan made his way back to the match and attempted to tag in, Savage slapped him across the face and walked out, leaving Hulk to finish the bout. As soon as the match ended, Hogan rushed back to confront Savage. The pair embroiled in a heated argument before the Macho Man claimed Hogan was jealous of his title reign and lusting after Miss Elizabeth. Filled with anger, Savage, clutching the WWF belt, swung at Hogan and sent him crumpling to the ground, following up with wild punches before the officials could step in to break the pair apart. Later, Hulk challenged the Macho Man for the WWF belt at WrestleMania 5 as the Mega Powers exploded. As the two came face to face in the main event, there was clear hatred in both men's eyes. The match saw Hogan performing his usual routine, with Savage applying a more vicious moveset throughout, attacking Hulk's neck and throat with elbows. The finish of the match came as Miss Elizabeth, who had chosen to remain neutral during the event, was ushered from ringside as Macho Man retained the advantage in the bout. He landed a perfect elbow from the top onto Hogan, who immediately jumped back to his feet, threw some punches, landed a big boot and the leg drop to win the match and his second WWF title. In the 1990 Royal Rumble, the man of the hour was Mr. Perfect. He talked the talk and truly backed it up every step of the way. His in-ring style was more technical and graceful than Hogan's. He was in better physical shape and begun to become one of the top stars in the company. He was getting a major push towards stardom and set to be the perfect winner of the Rumble. Vince gave the go-ahead and plans were set in place. Mr. Perfect would give the performance of his life and earn the respect of any doubters on his way to winning the Rumble and eventually the WWF title at WrestleMania, until, in the last minute, the plans were changed by Hogan backstage, and instead of a fresh new face for the company, Hogan came in at number 25 and started dumping everyone out of the ring. Mr. Perfect and the Hulk were the last two, and the crowd were excited to see their new favourite wrestler champion the legend. Mr. Perfect had been undefeated for almost a full year up until this match, with real momentum behind him. He was an amazing athlete and an up-and-coming star. But no, Hogan, the Hulkster, threw Mr. Perfect over the top rope to claim his victory at the 1990 Royal Rumble.
WrestleMania 6, would you say was the biggest night of your career?
Yeah.
At WrestleMania 6 later that year, with Hogan still the WWF champion and Royal Rumble winner, he moved on from his feud with Mr. Perfect and set his sights on the crazed Ultimate Warrior and his Intercontinental belt. a passing of the torch moment between the aging Hogan and his perceived successor, the Ultimate Warrior, who had grown to receive some of the biggest reactions in the company over the last year. An iconic title-for-title match which saw the new face of pro wrestling take on its greatest champion, new blood versus the established order, a changing of the guard and a special moment in pro wrestling history. Both Hogan and Warrior were wrestlers whose popularity arose from their charisma, energy and personality outside of the ring rather than their actions within it. Thus, the match in the main event of WrestleMania 6 was not a technical masterpiece of high-flying action and expert grappling. However, it is undeniable that when these two men came face to face, there was an electricity in the Toronto Dome that night, and the fans around the world could barely contain their excitement. When Ultimate Warrior eventually won, Hogan decided to personally hand over the title to him, a practice not commonly seen inside the ropes. Never missing an opportunity to grandstand and pose, yet again Hogan stole the limelight and very much overstayed his welcome, making the ending of the event more about his loss than the Ultimate Warrior's victory. In recent years, Hogan has gone on to say that the finish of the match and his passing of the torch was not his idea, and he would have liked to have handled the situation very differently. He said, WrestleMania 6, when he asked me to put the Warrior over, and I said, "That's no problem at all, brother. And my question always is, if I'm putting somebody over, what are we doing after that?" There wasn't really a clear-cut answer for that. I said, "How about this? When I put him over, I hand him the belt and everybody's cheering for him. I get halfway down the aisle and how about I just turn around and just drop him and drag him around the ring and just crucify him?" In my opinion, this shows that Hogan truly did only want the spotlight for himself, and even back then had suggested ideas which would only work to further his position at the end of WrestleMania 6, and further undermine the Ultimate Warrior's victory. Back at the beginning of my career, I had to make all these sacrifices, sleeping in a car on nights where I'd wrestle in front of 20,000 people because I wasn't making any money. Then, for 2 years leading up to WrestleMania, I would hear all the background chatter of how popular the character was becoming. Merchandising and licensing are huge in our business, and back then they actually had a guy, Jimmy, who would set up a table and sell merch before the matches. One day, Jimmy took me aside and told me how I was selling more merchandise than Hogan. This is when the true Ultimate Warrior was born. All of Jim Hellwig's ambition, drive and patience had fully merged with the face paint, energy and will to win of his wrestling counterpart. The pair had become intertwined in a way which saw wrestling storylines becoming real in his mind. After the match, he kinda went off on his own a little bit, just to take it all in, and just to give himself a big pat on the back and say, "Wow, nobody believes in me, but I did it." He was rich and now he was the world champion, but that was short-lived. Literally 2 months after, Jim Hellwig left and Ultimate Warrior came home. He became really erratic. He started staying on the road, which he never did before. He was disconnected. Something was off. This melding of the two men was seen as purposeful and greatly rewarding by Hellwig. The more you gave to your character, the more you actually became this character in all different ways. In your interviews, in your ring actions, the way you carried yourself outside of the ring, it really meant something. It also meant that the animosity he felt for his fellow wrestlers, and especially those competing for a position atop WWF's card, as real-life enemies, and especially Hulk Hogan. Over the years, Hogan and Warrior would go on to clash a handful of times in the ring, each one less magical than the previous, never managing to capture the electricity of that title-for-title match at WrestleMania. However, outside of the ring, the real-world feud only grew hotter as the years went by.
Was there some tension between you guys, some beef, man?
Not on my end.
What was his issue with you?
When we were wrestling, he was cool.
Yeah.
With Warrior seemingly jealous of not only the money that his rival was making, but also the celebrity and fame that was afforded to Hulk Hogan over him. In the latter part of his life, Warrior began recording and releasing his own YouTube vlog series, where he discussed his controversial ideas on pro wrestling and the wider world.
Hulk Hogan, or rather Terry Bollea. Would it be okay if we used his legal name?
Airing his grievances publicly with performers from his past. And a huge portion of these videos, as you would guess, would eventually get around to the topic of Hulk Hogan. As these videos continued to be released, Hellwig began to grow more angry and more steadfast in his more radical ideas on how Hogan had treated him and how their relationship had fared. Beyond that, Hellwig continually threw accusations at Hogan of being a liar and a poor father and husband, threatening to expose his mortal enemy as the fraud that the Warrior believed he was. This led to Hogan making similar accusations about Warrior, and the pair's families began being involved in the insults. It wouldn't be until years later that the two men would seemingly reconcile their differences and make amends for the years of pointless abuse and fighting.
A few times he flew back to my house and hung out at the pool with my kids. He was great with my kids.
Did anybody talk to the Ultimate Warrior?
Look at him in the face paint and shake his hand, brother, said, I got nothing but love for you.
What was his issue with you?
I don't know.
I went right up to him. I shook his hand and said, "Brother, I know I'm not supposed to talk to you, but I just want to let you know that I love you. And if you ever want to be friends, I'd love to be friends with you. If we could ever do business, that would be great. But I just want to tell you that I love you so much. And whatever I did, please forgive me." And then I noticed that there was a WWE camera that peeled around the side. I had no idea that it had a camera following me, so that was real, bro, and I'm so glad I got to talk to him. But of course, the story isn't that simple. Whenever Terry Bollea is involved, there's always going to be a grey area for what is true and what is a lie, made up to further his own public perception. It's been really quiet since the passing of my husband, and the father of my girls, Mrs. Dana Warrior, said in a statement, "Someone sent me what Mr. Bollea had to say in a video interview with Grantland, and I would just like to ask him to stop. He's the only person in the WWE universe who did not give a call or send a card. My girls asked why he didn't check on us like everyone else, and I explained simply that there isn't a camera at our mailbox or in the house when we receive our calls. I would ask respectfully, Mr. Bollea, for you to understand my girl's hurt and just let some time pass before you say anything more." Perhaps these two old men were made for one another, mortal enemies from the first time they locked up in the ring until the day that one of them eventually died. Pretty sad. By 1998, World Championship Wrestling was running into full gear and signing many famous faces from WWE's past and present roster. When Hulk Hogan's NWO needed a new faction to feud with, and that faction needed a recognisable name to front it, the Ultimate Warrior was given the call. However, the character seemingly still belonged to WWF and Titan Sports, who defended their ownership of the copyright. Famously appearing as a figment of Hulk Hogan's imagination in a wacky segment featuring a two-way mirror, the feud culminated in a match between the two at the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view event in 1998, which was widely regarded as a disappointment due to Warrior's apparent lack of in-ring conditioning and the confusing storyline. His poor reception led Warrior to take his frustrations out on those backstage, never managing to find friends in the locker room. Warrior has since gone on to say that he feels he was only ever contracted to WCW in order for Hulk Hogan to get his win back, as retribution for Warrior's success at Wrestlemania.
I mean, it started out bad and just it progressively got worse.
When the time came for Hulk Hogan to pass the torch and be defeated by The Undertaker, Hogan didn't want to give up his beloved championship belt and place atop the WWF card without a fight. Obviously, he fought with The Undertaker in the ring, a classic match, but the fight also continued long after the bell. In the bout, Undertaker defeated Hogan when he landed a tombstone piledriver onto a steel chair in the ring, a crowning moment in the early career of a man who would go on to be one of the biggest names in wrestling over the next 30 years. But some bitterness seeped out of Hogan as he came crashing down in the ring. The Undertaker explained, "And when I tell you I had the brother secure, he was secure. Boom, I give him the tombstone. As soon as my knees hit, I hear, 'Oh, you got me, brother.' I'm so devastated, mortified, right? So they get Hogan out of the ring and I get the belt. I go backstage and I'm asking, where's Hulk at? Oh, he's laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there and he's laying out on the floor. So now I'm in this precarious situation. I'm still a greenhorn, and now I've got to confront the face of wrestling, the biggest draw ever. I was like, Terry, I watched it back. Your head never hit. He's like, well, brother, you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move, and that's what jammed my neck, because I couldn't move at all. It was too tight. Then I knew.
I was like, okay. Then I knew, I was like, okay. I kind of realized, okay, I know what you're all about.
The fake injury from Hogan could have ended The Undertaker's career then and there. It could have prevented anyone from ever wanting to work with him again, and could have seen the Tombstone Piledriver, arguably Undertaker's most iconic move, banned from use in the WWF. Hogan's head didn't hit the chair or the canvas during the move, as you can clearly see, nor did Hulk receive a life-shortening neck injury as he claimed. He was lying.
Shane's right there telling me, he's like, Mark, he goes, his head wasn't anywhere close to touching that mat.
If we could take a look at the camel's hooves.
It was 1991, and at the time, the US and Iraq were in the midst of the Gulf War, and tensions were extremely high between the two nations. The WWF once again proved that they weren't above using any sensitive topic in order to draw a crowd, having turned their returning all-American hero Sergeant Slaughter into a Yankee-hating Iraqi sympathizer and dedicated follower of the Iraq leader Saddam Hussein. They placed Slaughter as the leader of a newly formed group known as the Triangle of Terror, with General Adnan and eventually the Iron Sheik as Colonel Mustafa. The hatred that these three men received when appearing at shows meant that anyone who faced off against them instantly had the support of the American audience. After winning the 1991 Royal Rumble, Hogan headed backstage where he was interviewed by Gene Okerlund. During the segment, news was brought to Hulk's attention that the new WWF champion Sergeant Slaughter and General Adnan were celebrating their defeat of the Ultimate Warrior by destroying Hulk's beloved American flag. This sent Hogan into a patriotic rage, where he promised to defeat Slaughter at Wrestlemania for the WWF title and for the honour of the American people. Before the event, Hulk promised fans that as soon as he had destroyed the Triangle of Terror and taken the American WWF Championship back from these evil foreigners, Iraq would concede to the US and bow out of the conflict in the Gulf. The heat of the event drew so much controversy that although it was originally scheduled to take place in the 100,000-seat Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, the stadium was deemed too large to protect from any potential backlash it may receive. WWF stated that due to a bomb threat and the inability to guarantee the fans' safety, they would move the event to the nearby Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, with its ability to hold the 16,000 crowd attendance. However, in recent years it has become evident that the reason WWF moved the show was not the security threat, but largely in part due to the poor ticket sales for the event, with an estimated 10,500 paying for a ticket to see the show, and a further 5,000 seats being filled by those with a free ticket. In the main event of WrestleMania 7, Superstars and Stripes Forever, Hogan defeated Slaughter to win the WWF Championship and celebrated with the people of America in the face of their real-life enemies, the Iraqi government. Hulk Hogan declaring himself as the reason to why the US and the coalition forces defeated Iraq and liberated Kuwait is a disgrace. It is a spit in the face to the hundreds of soldiers who have lost their lives in an attempt to restore freedom and democracy to the Middle East. It takes away from the efforts of the thousands of men and women who bravely fought for what they considered to be the right option and stood against Iraq's oppression. By the 15th of March 1991, America and the coalition forces had removed the Iraqi forces from Kuwait and handed power to a Kuwaiti democratic government. By the time WrestleMania 7 took place 9 days later, the whole war was already at an end. I can appreciate that Hogan's character is and always was as patriotic as it's possible to be. I understand the idea that his confidence in the US's victory in the Middle East was probably reassuring to small children watching at the time, heck, even some adults too, but there is something so dark and twisted in the idea that a simple, meaningless pro wrestling show would attempt to ramp up the emotion of an event which wasn't selling well by using the real-life deaths of an ongoing war. It was at this time that Hogan began to spread his entertainment wings and starred in a number of movies over the next few years. His original popularity had spawned from his excellent performance in Rocky III, so why couldn't he return to acting and further progress his career? From Mr. Nanny to Santa with Muscles, Hogan never appeared as the lead role in a single film, which was praised by critics. Most failed miserably at the box office and brought little to no profit when they made it to their home video releases. So you can imagine that with his unprecedented success in the world of pro wrestling, Hogan would simply move on from his failed endeavours as a leading man on the silver screen and return to his role in the ring. But no, Hulk decided to push on, something which I oddly respect from him. Failing at something new isn't a bad thing if you can pick yourself back up, learn from your mistakes and get better. Then all the best to you. But Hogan didn't do this either. He simply continued on with his terrible films, delivering poor acting performances with incredible consistency, and when he failed to ever have a box office success, he reverted to what he knows best, lying. He explained, "The reason why my movies didn't do as well as they should have done is because, in my early 20s, a Hollywood producer came on to me, and I rejected him. I was blackballed ever since." A statement which I cannot confirm nor deny. I must always attempt to believe the victim in these types of cases, and if this situation is true, then I feel bad for Hogan. But the fact is, he wasn't blackballed from Hollywood. He acted in dozens of roles over the years, and their lack of success measured up perfectly with his lack of talent. Going back to Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles, Hogan even lied about those two releases, stating that he completely rewrote the script for both films, but was denied the writer's credit by the Hollywood Writers Guild. Firstly, I've read Hogan's autobiographies, and I know for a fact that even with a ghostwriter, he has the writing prowess of a man who spent 30 years getting dropped on his head. Secondly, and most importantly, why would you ever want to take credit for either of those films? This is a lie I think I will never truly understand. Wouldn't it be so funny if a masculine alpha male had to look after some children? That would be so funny. I think it's really funny when men have to take time out from going to the gym and going into a bar and having a fight in order to take care of children. It's just so funny. Don't you think it's funny? Oh, you don't? You don't? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, don't ever watch Mr. Nanny from 1993 then, because that is the only joke throughout the entire film, and it goes over and over and over. It sucks. If you want to see a film about mischievous children who play pranks on their babysitter in order to gain attention of their parents, in a film with high production values and a heartwarming narrative, watch Nanny McPhee. If you want to see children who are ignored by their parents and end up having to use crazy plans and inventive traps in order to protect their home from a bunch of slapstick villains, then watch Home Alone. If you want to see a man out of his depth and struggling to learn the subtle nuances of everyday childcare, watch Mr. Mum. Mr. Nanny is an hour and a half full of over-the-top comic book style action. Considering it's aimed solely at young children, the movie becomes a lot more chaotic and violent than I'd expected before watching. But even those moments of explosive mayhem didn't really entice me, and I think that most people would feel about the same. The story is interesting enough to grab your attention, but the bare skeletal bones of the basic plot isn't enough to ever consider recommending this movie. It's bad throughout and holds extraordinary little significance in the modern day too.
They were worried about losing sponsors and network support.
Is that the most painful thing in terms of the fallout?
It was tough.
Most of us think of professional wrestling as harmless entertainment and Hulk Hogan as the king of the ring. But was there a sinister side to his success? Some people now claim that his hard-muscled good guy image really came from his past use of dangerous drugs.
The kids are believing that if they take their vitamins and say their prayers, that they're going to grow up to be some super athlete. Well, I got news for you. You can take your vitamins and you can say your prayers, but you're never going to grow up to be 300 pounds with 24-inch arms unless you take steroids.
Industry icons such as Lex Luger have spoken out about the pressures of being an athlete or a performer in pro wrestling. In sports, the saying is, the ends justify the means. We are taught that since we were little. Do whatever you've got to do to win, to be the best. Step over, step on, and step through. That is how all these performance-enhancing drugs got into our culture, and that leads to guys wanting to take shortcuts and then cheat until you get caught, and then lie. In 1991, the use of steroids in pro wrestling came into the zeitgeist in the US when, on the Arsenio Hall show, WWF's biggest icon Hulk Hogan was forced to sweat and squirm through an uncomfortable televised interview about his involvement with substance abuse and PEDs.
All you should do is come out and tell them the truth. Quit lying to them. Tell them the truth and be man enough to tell them the truth, and say, hey, I did steroids and, I've done them for years and years.
Another who, before his death, was outspoken about steroid use in pro wrestling and his involvement was the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig. If I had to relate anything to the lifestyle, it would be to point out how the demands of pro wrestling differ from the lifestyle of any other organised sports pro athletes. There is no season, you go year round, and with the travel you do, you can fall into a bad habit of burning the candles at both ends. It's easy to fall into a habit of abusing stimulants and painkillers to cover up for lackluster energy. Bottom line is, there are differences between use and abuse, and it's obvious that many guys cross the line. As the Ultimate Warrior seemingly struggled to balance his unrealistic expectations of his body, his public perception, and the pressure from WWE, fractures began to appear between Jim Hellwig and the pro wrestling behemoth. Vince McMahon, since Hellwig's passing, commented, Warrior's experiments with growth hormones were the reason, but the steroids use was another big factor for the Ultimate Warrior's death. In 1991, Hellwig's relationship with WWE was further tarnished when Vincent McMahon was charged with routinely obtaining anabolic steroids by the US attorney in New York. The pro wrestler's use of performance enhancers was put under a very public spotlight for the first time, as witnesses from the wrestling world were called to stand to testify.
Oh, my brother, testify!
In 1994, the WWF's biggest star, industry icon Hulk Hogan, testified not only that he had tried steroids, but that he had in fact been a regular steroid user for over 14 years. His defense was that he had been told the substances were above board and as a licensed doctor had given them to him.
Dr. George Zahorian was the ringside physician for the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission. Last June, he went on trial for illegally selling steroids to professional wrestlers. Hulk Hogan was called to testify, but was excused at the last minute. Dr. Zahorian testified he had treated Hulk Hogan for a serious steroid abuse problem with success. Hogan says he only used steroids 3 times for treatment of an injury and under a doctor's careful supervision.
I think the mindset changed around 1990 when it became illegal. There was an era when it wasn't just steroid use in the WWE, but it was predominant in every single sport across the board. Every sport in the world was doing it. The mindset was, it was safer than taking sugar. At that time, every wrestler I knew was taking part in steroid use in WWE. I'm sure Hulk Hogan in his head thought if he denied extensive steroid use in the WWE in 1991, the media would move on. Who would have ever thought his denial would cause a steroid media buzz which attacked wrestling so fierce with major ramifications? Desirable TV time slots were lost, merchandise died in retail stores, sponsors left in droves, the fan base dwindled. Did you take a shower? Yeah. Did you brush your teeth? Yeah. Did you take your steroids? Yeah. That was the deal. It was how I lived.
everything changed in a short amount of time, and I had a chance to take the high road or the low road.
First of all, going into WrestleMania 9, the plan was for Yokozuna to be our champion for the immediate future. That changed the weekend of WrestleMania, said Bruce Pritchard. The reasoning was because of the international tour we had coming up. It was going to be Hulk's farewell tour in a lot of respects, and we felt it would be better to have Hulk as the champion. At WrestleMania 9, the main event was Bret Hart versus Yokozuna. The match was short and certainly nothing to write home about, but before it was even finished, Hulk made his way to the ring, demanded a match with Yokozuna, and beat him in seconds, stealing the limelight at the end of another big show. He later lied on a handshake and screwed Bret with McMahon. Hulk promised to drop the belt to Hart and then said, "He isn't in my league, he can't lace my boots up," behind Bret's back, later dropping the belt instead to Yokozuna at SummerSlam. Hart confronted the pair, who told him that that's just what you thought you heard, when Hart reminded them of the deal they had previously both agreed to. It was my harebrained idea, and it caused quite a controversy. It was one of those audible Wild Wild West type situations. So Hogan had lost faith with the wrestlers and promoters in WWF and been widely rejected by a huge swathe of its fanbase. He needed a way out, a way to reignite his career and take Hulkamania in a different direction. He could no longer return to Japan. He was still at odds with the Yakuza and under threat of death if he were ever to return to the country. Hogan had injured beloved Japanese wrestling icon Antonio Inoki so severely during a match that Inoki had been declared dead by paramedics, only to be revived and his life saved moments later via CPR. With Japanese wrestling fans at the time still certain of the reality of pro wrestling, they took Hogan's almost deadly assault seriously and thus called in their version of the Japanese mafia for retribution. Hogan said, "I actually killed Antonio Inoki in the ring, but they brought him back to life with CPR. I couldn't leave Japan for a while because the fans and the Japanese mafia wanted to have me killed because Inoki is so well loved over there." But of course, none of that is true. Just another wild lie told by Hogan to add to the pile. Antonio Inoki never suffered as much as an injury during one of the pair's bouts, let alone succumbing to death at the hands of the Hulkster. I mean, come on, look at this man. I don't think it would be possible to kill him in the ring even if you tried, let alone unintentionally. And you may think that a lie involving the murder of an in-ring opponent and a run-in with the Yakuza is such a massive lie that it would stand out and be remembered by all those who have even a passing interest in Hulk Hogan and pro wrestling. But the lie isn't the biggest that Hogan ever told. It isn't even the most ridiculous lie about Japan. Hogan claimed on the WWE DVD Hulk Still Rules that Japanese wrestling machine and 6-time IWGP heavyweight champion Tatsumi Fujinami attempted to fight him for real during one of their matches whilst Hogan was the WWF champion, and that Fujinami's aim was to legitimately pin Hogan against the script and steal the title belt from him. Hogan states that he had to go into full shoot mode and beat Fujinami in a real contest and retain his title. From all my research, there is no solid evidence during any of the pair's in-ring meetings that this ever occurred. The televised matches appear to all follow a pre-arranged script, and if the match Hogan was talking about wasn't taped, then what would have been the benefit of Fujinami attempting to take the belt from him? And nobody would have seen it, and thus nobody would have known that Hogan had lost. It just makes very little sense to me. Hogan claimed that in February of 1993, he sat next to a fellow wrestler and WWE Hall of Famer Kerry Von Erich on a long plane flight from LA to a wrestling show in Japan, talking about life and the business for the entire journey. 3 days later, after the flight, Von Erich sadly killed himself with a gunshot to the chest at his father's estate in Texas. A truly horrendous event, and one which affected so many in the pro wrestling community at the time, which, in my opinion, makes Hogan's lie on the subject even more disgusting. See, the pair were never sat on a flight from LA to Japan 3 days before Von Erich's death. Neither man was in Japan in February of '93. Hogan didn't appear that year in Japan until May. Kerry Von Erich never even travelled to Japan that entire year. So why did Hogan lie? But still, through all of these awful twistings of the truth, they still aren't Hogan's most ludicrous lie about his time in Japan. That would have to be this one. Because of the time difference between the US and Japan, the travel back and forth meant that I worked 400 days in 1 year. To really blow your mind, think about this. If I say I wrestled 400 days a year, it's no exaggeration. My years were actually longer than 365 days. The American audience had no idea that I was wrestling in Japan during the whole Hulkamania thing. There were times when I'd fly back and forth to Japan twice a week just to wrestle. Now it was nothing to wrestle in Madison Square Garden one day, then fly all the way to the Egg Dome in Tokyo the same day, because you'd gain 14 hours, and then fly back to the West Coast. So I could wrestle in Japan today, and then fly back across the international dateline and land in another town yesterday. I was constantly adding days to my years. Now, put aside the fact that Hogan never wrestled in Japan and the US in the same day, nor the same week, and only once or twice even in the same month. His exaggeration on the topic in the light of everything else I can forgive. Maybe he misspoke and meant 400 appearances in a year, but that isn't true either. But 400 days in a year, gaining 14 hours. This isn't how time works. That isn't how any of this works. It's a lie based off of a misunderstanding, and if it wasn't so pathetic, it would be more hilarious. Hogan had a couple of excellent runs in Japan. He had some of the best matches of his career against the likes of Antonio Inoki and the Great Muta. The Japanese fans even refer to him as Ichiban or number one. So why does he need to lie about something which anyone with half a working brain can see as false?
It's more than the gimmick. It's just that this Hulkamania thing is always going to be around. It's immortal. Long after I'm dead and gone.
This is a hot dog in the normal world. This is a performance coined as hot dogging by the great guys over at OSW in the wrestling world. This is a hot dog in both the normal and the wrestling world. Okay, maybe that's a bit far, but I can honestly say that even as a kid, I was never a fan of Hulk Hogan. He never connected with me on a level like he did with so many others. When I was younger, I felt left out. Why couldn't I just say my prayers and eat my vitamins and be a happy little Hulkamaniac like everyone else? Why was I more encapsulated by Scott Hall and Kevin Nash in WCW as part of the NWO and not the frontman Hogan, even back then? Okay, so I'm too young to have lived through his heyday. Arguably, his best days were past Hogan before I even started watching pro wrestling, but I've gone back and tried to fall in love. But that spark that made Hulk Hogan a household name for generations and one of the all-time most famous wrestlers to ever step into the ring, for me, it just wasn't there. He didn't have as good matches as Ric Flair, nor did he ever hold as many world titles. He wasn't as charismatic as Dusty Rhodes. He was never as much a patriot as Hacksaw Jim Duggan. He couldn't cut a promo like Macho Man nor fly around the ring like Shawn Michaels. He was less physically imposing than the Ultimate Warrior, and he didn't share his intensity. His films weren't a success like The Rock's. Every single one of them was shit. He wasn't as tall as Andre the Giant or as heavy as Yokozuna, nor was he as big of a financial draw as Bruno Sammartino. He wasn't as much of a positive impact backstage as Triple H. He wasn't even the coolest guy in the NWO. He wasn't as beloved as Stone Cold Steve Austin, nor as hated as the Iron Sheik. He was less handsome than Rick Rude. He wasn't a young prodigy like Randy Orton, nor did he show outstandingly quick adoption to the sport like Brock Lesnar. His ego may tell him that he was the greatest of all time, so will the WWE in its record books. But to me, the only thing that is immortal about Hulk Hogan is the legacy of backstabbing, selfishness and greed. Hulk would regularly live up to the lyrics of his entrance theme. He would stand in the way of evil to protect America from those who sought to invade their star-spangled shores. Children idolized him and flocked to shower him with their admiration. He helped the poor, he saved the homeless, he reconciled wars and triumphed over evil, but I still didn't like him. I know it doesn't sound like it. He's a hero, I hear you cry. He helped to make wrestling what it is today, and I agree. And that's why I have such an issue with the memory of his career, how his achievements are lauded in numerous best-of segments by fans and WWE alike, Hall of Fame ceremonies and self-indulgent Saudi Arabia shows. If you take a deeper look, under this thin, leathery hot dog skin of Hulk Hogan, what you'll find is a twisted history of lies and manipulation. And okay, maybe all of that doesn't sway you.
Now to Hulk Hogan's latest battle. The wrestler who helped transform the sport into a multi-million-dollar industry claims he's being run out of the ring.
Hulk Hogan's initial run in WCW saw him dressed in the classic red and yellow, continuing to say his prayers and eat his vitamins and defeat almost everyone put before him. His move from WWF had brought with it a reinvigorated passion for the business, but after a while, fans once again grew tired of seeing the same 4 or 5 moves from Hogan, defeating everyone on the roster. This is when the pivotal moment of Hogan's career occurred. He reinvented himself as a villainous heel and shocked the wrestling world.
Once Hulk Hogan said the training, the prayers, and the vitamins, and all you kids, I did it for the money.
At Bash at the Beach in 1996, when Nash and Hall were set to take on Lex Luger, Randy Savage and Sting, the outsiders were at a numbers disadvantage and promised to reveal the third man of their trio. In one of the most shocking and memorable moments in all of pro wrestling history, they teamed with Hulk Hogan and formed the formidable faction, the New World Order. The newly formed trio defeated the good guys when Hogan landed a leg drop on Randy Savage and covered him with what many considered to be an incredibly disrespectful manner.
I did everything for the kids. And the reception I got when I came out here, you fans can stick it, brother.
This from the man who's soon to be seen portraying Santa at Christmas time. Now he spray paints, spits, defiles, and beats up anyone in his path.
The leg drop stayed as part of Hogan's finish to matches throughout his entire career. He must have punched his opponent, pointed at them, and dropped the leg 1,000 times. But that night at Bash at the Beach in 1996, the leg drop signified more than just a victory for the Hulkster over Randy Savage. As his leg landed on the Macho Man's chest, it ushered in a new age for the entire pro wrestling industry. Stone Cold Steve Austin spoke on the incident, saying, "I was watching this with my guys before the show," Austin said. "I said, hey man, that's disrespect, am I right? Tell me about the cover. For some people, they don't get this, but when you make a cover in that position, it's almost like, dude, you're supposed to be here, and here I am with a little something extra. I said, dude, he's too high and not close to Savage's body." This pushed WCW to continued success in the famed Monday Night Wars in the mid to late 90s, helping WCW triumph from the 6th of June for 83 weeks in a row. I knew I could work as a heel because I'd watched so much of Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson and superstar Billy Graham and the Great Malenko, Hogan said. They'd chop, kick and beat the crap out of you, but then they'd backpedal, cross their heart and drop to their knees the moment the babyface would make his comeback. For me, the problem was the timing. I didn't know if that was the right timing to do it. Hogan recalls, We needed a certain type of heat. I was someone they had loved and believed in, so in order for this to work, there needed to be the right reaction. That's what we got when people in the crowd started throwing water bottles, trash, and everything else at us in the ring. That's what we needed and we got. It was later in 1997 that mixed martial arts competition Pride was formed. The UFC had started 4 years earlier, and the sport was gaining traction with combat fans around the world. Something about this popularity drew Hogan's attention, and you know just how much he loves attention. In an interview, Hogan explained how back in the 1970s he trained as a mixed martial artist and fought in the Pride promotion against its top stars at the time. But as you've probably just realised, Pride didn't exist in the 70s, so what was Hogan referring to? It was this knowledge of real-life combat and ability in the octagon which Hogan claimed to have, which meant that in 1993, when UFC was formed, he was top of the list of stars that the upstart company wanted to sign. UFC wanted to build a card around Hogan, bringing in his pro wrestling fans to their new genre of combat sports. But Hogan wasn't interested because guys get beat up when the fight should be stopped. We looked at it and it was very violent, and the referees weren't stopping the matches and letting guys get beat up when they should have been stopped, so we just didn't want to have any part of it, but it became quite a phenomena. But as always, Hogan's lying. He was never meant to be the UFC's top attraction back in 1993. He was never even contacted by the promotion at all. Co-founder of UFC, McLaren, said Hulk Hogan being asked to fight in the original UFC is absolutely false.
It is my honor to be here with one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, sports and entertainment, huge personality, the one and only Hulk Hogan.
Here's the situation with me and Hulk Hogan. It's just, we've been acquaintances at best. Never been best friends, never been friends. Just a business type thing on the television. Everybody knows it's sports entertainment, entertaining the wrestling fans. But sometimes what goes on behind the scenes is stronger than the soap opera on the video scope. And that's what happened with me and Hulk Hogan.
At least initially. Proved to be the Macho Man Randy Savage, who was enraged when his wife and longtime valet, Miss Elizabeth, joined the faction. Savage's history with NWO leader Hogan and the fact that Randy was the man who Hogan originally turned on to form the alliance with Nash and Hall made the rivalry all the more intense. At Halloween Havoc in 1996, Hall and Nash defeated Harlem Heat to become the WCW Tag Team Champions, and Hogan defeated Savage to retain his belt. Now, not only did the New World Order hold the passion from the fans and the attention of those in the locker room, but also all three major championships within the company. At the end of the event, Roddy Piper made a surprise return and came face to face with Hulk. With him, Piper brought a revelation. He had hinted at the fact that the NWO were not working alone in their coup of WCW and were, in fact, working with someone high up in the company in order to reach their goals. Roddy Piper revealed this person to be Eric Bischoff, to the shock of many fans around the wrestling world. At Super Brawl in February, Hogan faced off against longtime foe in Roddy Piper. When returning, Randy Savage made his way to the ring during the bout. It seemed like Hogan was finally going to get his comeuppance at the hands of two of his oldest rivals. But, in an unpredictable turn of events, Savage attacked Piper and handed the victory to Hogan, before officially revealing himself as the newest member of the New World Order.
Me and Rodzilla, we be taking over, brah.
Later at the Uncensored show, after Hogan, Nash, Hall and Savage defeated two other teams, they were awarded the right to challenge for any championship within WCW at a time that they saw fit. As they celebrated, Sting made his way from above the arena and decimated everyone with his bat, letting the NW know that even if the company was beginning to buckle under their continued assault, he would always be watching, waiting for a moment to strike. One of the most important and discussed moments in wrestling history is the Montreal Screwjob. So, as you can imagine, Hulk Hogan, the man who is seemingly always desperate to be the one in the limelight, has his own take on the incident. He said, well, Bret was supposed to lose to Shawn Michaels at, Wrestlemania, whatever the hell it was. 16 or 17, I don't know. Where all the fans were chanting, Bret screwed Bret. Bret told Vince McMahon, I'm not losing to Shawn Michaels in Canada, and Shawn Michaels went out there and pulled a fast one on Bret Hart and held him down and pinned him, and Bret couldn't do anything about it, and so-called excellence of execution, who was supposed to be the greatest wrestler of all time, little teeny Shawn Michaels held him down and embarrassed him though. Bret Hart was being a horse's ass, saying he wouldn't lose, and Shawn Michaels pinned him anyway. That's not what happened. The Montreal Screwjob happened at Survivor Series, not WrestleMania 16 or 17, whatever, I don't know, like Hogan said. Fans weren't cheering Bret screwed Bret on the night. It comes from a Vince McMahon interview way after the fact. And probably most importantly, Shawn never pinned Bret. He famously held Bret in his own sharpshooter submission, one of the most iconic images in all of pro wrestling history, most likely. Did Hogan really not know about how it went down? If not, why did he just make up several key details about what happened? Key details which are easily verified as false, and most casual wrestling fans would realise were not true. Why would Hogan lie about an event which he had zero involvement in? It just baffles my mind.
One match that we built up with you and Hogan at Starrcade. The finish of that match is one that's been discussed and debated and...
Eric Bischoff said on the Starrcade 97 main event, we knew what the finish we wanted was before we even got to the building. We knew before we got on a plane. We knew about it months in advance. We knew we wanted Sting to go over. How he went over? He had to go over strong. He had to end the story exactly how the audience wanted it to end, on the highest note possible. That was the finish going in. This one's a little strange, but allow me to explain. 18 months is a long time in pro wrestling, but a year and a half is what the initial meeting between Sting and Hulk Hogan deserved. A slow, drawn-out story which would have fans captivated every week, reaching a peak at WCW's biggest show of the year, and the end of the storyline which would live long in the memory, which it does, for all the wrong reasons.
Hell, I was the one that had to say, was that a fast count? That was a fast count. I thought it was going to be a fast count. What the fuck's going on?
Sting and Hulk Hogan were the two franchise guys, and the franchise guys were butting heads over what was going to happen. One guy came up to me and told me to fast count to give him some heat and give him an out, while the other guy said, don't fast count it, just keep it nice and slow.
I think if we'd have just kept with the game plan and done what we had all agreed on, things would have been a lot different.
Nick Patrick, established WCW wrestling referee, admitted that Hulk spoke to him and rigged a part of a match between him and Sting at Starrcade 97. The ref was asked by Hogan to make the pin count as slow as possible, making Sting look weak after the beating he'd received and the loss from Hogan. Eric Bischoff wanted there to be a fast count so that Sting would look strong in defeat and further add to the idea that the referee was on the side of Hogan and the NWO all along, and Nick Patrick got caught right in the middle. The person in charge didn't want to make a call, he didn't want to decide.
It was a year-long plan, and it was in motion, and that day, suddenly it wasn't in motion like it was anymore.
Interrupting Hogan's celebrations, a debuting Bret Hart made his way to the ring and explained the referee's fast count was illegal, declaring himself the ref and making the match restart fairly. It seems pretty straightforward by pro wrestling standards, if not a bit crazy by the real world standards. Until we listen to Nick Patrick and find out that he was instructed to make a normal speed count, a fast count and a slow count by different people backstage and didn't know what to do, resulting in the original pin from Hogan to Sting at a normal paced call, thus making Bret's interruptions seem like a villainous move and diminishing his esteem with the crowd. In this moment, Hogan shows how well he understands the subtleties of pro wrestling and how just a small difference in how a match plays out can have huge ramifications moving forward. He showed that he was willing to yet again go behind the back of the performer he was facing in the ring and make unagreed changes in order to make himself look better. As Starrcade went off the air, the fans in the audience and at home were left confused. Bret Hart's debut felt oddly timed and lackluster. Hogan, the villain, seemed like he had been screwed out of his victory, and Sting, the hero, even in victory with the WCW title around his waist, was the one doing all of the plotting.
But I think it was due to all the chaos that happened, the hours that, of that day that led up to the match.
Nothing felt right, and it led to weeks of uncertainty from the company. The controversy of the finish of the match continued on after the show, and the title belt was made vacant until Sting and Hogan could resolve the debate on who the true WCW champion was. Replays of the referee's count and Bret Hart's actions were played and discussed the following week on WCW television. The way in which the crowd had been so dissatisfied with the Hulk and Sting encounter meant WCW needed to attempt to rekindle the feud quickly. This led to a rematch at the Super Brawl pay-per-view on February the 22nd, 1998. Sting beat Hogan to win the WCW World Heavyweight title, a moment which was hard-earned and well-deserved by Sting.
Following Hogan's lead, many former superstars of the World Wrestling Federation, like the Macho Man Randy Savage, enjoyed new success in the WCW.
Vince McMahon was going for younger wrestlers at the time. He was going with a new generation theme, nothing more than that. And I was doing announcing for him over there, and I just still wanted to be participating.
The NWO is one big happy family. Or are they?
Leading up to the Uncensored show, Hogan and Randy Savage were embroiled in a game of one-upmanship, as each trying to show that they were the best wrestler in the NWO. This led to a steel cage match where the pair attempted to settle the score once and for all, but no victor was declared on the night. After the match, Randy Savage declared that Hulk Hogan and his fellow NWO teammates were conspiring against the Macho Man. In the main event of Uncensored, Scott Hall attempted and failed to take Sting's WCW belt away from him.
Hogan and Savage are declaring war on each other. I'm gonna bury you.
It was around this time that Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan began to show that their clear differences were beginning to have a strain on the group. When Hogan attacked Nash after they had wrestled as tag team partners, it was clear for the world to see. When it came time for Hulk to once again challenge for the NWO title, it was now held by his fellow group member and longtime rival Randy Savage.
Are you guys good guys? Are you bad guys? Everyone's hitting everybody with chairs?
Right, we're just whatever we are, just kind of like a rebel group of people. It's like Jesse James, Doc Holliday, Billy the Kid, all banded together, and sometimes we get along and sometimes we don't.
During the match, Kevin Nash came out to powerbomb Hogan as retribution for the Hulkster's recent blindside attack. But as Bret Hart managed to lay the limp Hogan's arm over the also seemingly unconscious Savage, Hogan won back his WCW title. At this moment, the first major fracture within the New World Order tore the entire group apart.
Well, I think that Hogan's whole life has been a work, and there's nothing about his life that's ever been unplanned.
A few years later, Hogan did indeed prove his fighting prowess, taking on legendary boxer George Foreman to raise money for charity. I was in a charity boxer versus wrestler fight with George Foreman, and I hung him with him. So, against my better judgment, I started boxing with George Foreman. The first time I tried to hit him, I didn't even come close. You think George is slow when you watch him on TV. Let me tell you, brother, when he starts with his bombing and weaving, you wouldn't believe how fast he is. No matter what I did, I couldn't hit him, and it was pissing me off. Then, just as we got near the end of the round, he got me in the corner. I put my arms up to protect myself. Then, all of a sudden, he stepped back and threw a left hook at me. His hook hit me in the right arm, up by the shoulder, and he hit me so hard my whole leg went numb. That freaked me out. He hadn't hit me in the leg, but my leg had no feeling in it. I hobbled out of the corner and George thought it was hilarious. I couldn't imagine him hitting me in the face with that hook. I'd be dead. Anyway, he took it easy on me for the next couple of rounds, but by the end of the second one, I couldn't even hold my gloves up. In the third round, it just became a comedy routine because I couldn't box anymore. The kids who were watching us had a good laugh. I'm glad for them because I certainly wasn't laughing. Problem is, this fight never took place, or at least if it did, nobody saw it. A charity match put on to draw a crowd between two bona fide legends in their respective fields. Cameras would be all over that, right? It makes more money for the charity if it's publicised, as the name of said organisation would be getting free publicity, right? At the very least, it makes Hogan and Foreman look like decent human beings for doing something potentially dangerous to help those less fortunate, so they would bring along a camera or two, right? Hogan's lying about the entire thing. There are no news articles reporting on the event, nor pictures to back up the claims. No specific charity is mentioned in the story, so he can't fact check there either. Seems awfully suspicious to me.
Give me a break. The kids know the NWO's cool. They know what it takes to get by, but then when it's time to take care of business, you step in the ring and you make the first move. When it's time to be Santa, you step up to the mark and chop down the first tree. We just got done body slamming Turner, his organization, his big high-rise in Atlanta, and the whole WCW. Now the NWO, we're gonna body slam Beverly Hills and the little clique around here, just like we did the whole wrestling world.
After Kevin Nash had dissolved the NWO Wolfpack, he once again reunited with Hulk Hogan and Scott Hall in order to rekindle the initial spark which turned the supergroup into a household name. The group was for a brief time streamlined, featuring some of the biggest names in pro wrestling at the time, and certainly the lion's share of main eventers within WCW, and would run for a successful 8 months. The NWO Elite comprised of Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff and Scott Steiner, Conan and Lex Luger. And even when it was clear that this bloated approach was not only becoming stale for the fans at home watching the screen, but the bloated roster was forcing the company to hemorrhage money on its plummeting decline from atop the wrestling world.
Small wonder this entire industry now boasts annual estimated revenues over $1 billion.
We deliver. We don't sell anybody short, whether it's a 3-hour program or a 3-hour pay-per-view for $59 or $39. We don't knock somebody out in 20 seconds. You get 3 hours of entertainment.
Fans were clamouring to see their favourite in Goldberg put the record straight and reclaim what many believed was still deservedly his. So, when we tuned into Monday Nitro to see the match, you can imagine how disappointed I felt when another NWO scheme had got in the way. Members conspired to have Goldberg detained and thus unable to compete, leaving a path for the returning Hogan to face off for the title against Nash. Hulk Hogan was one of my least favourite wrestlers in WCW. I also hated all forms of the NWO. I was 7. Of course I wanted to cheer on who I perceived as the good guys, so instead of getting to see Nash destroyed at the hands of the rather exciting Goldberg, I was stuck watching 2 wrestlers who I didn't much care for in a match I didn't really want to see. However, as many of you probably already realise, things for little chubby 7-year-old me were about to go from bad to much, much worse. Hogan poked Nash with a single finger. Nash collapsed in an over-the-top and theatrical fashion, and the crowd's palpable excitement is popped. The fans dropped their arms and opened their mouths in confusion. Some of them probably didn't see the quick flick of the pinky from Hogan, and those who did were surely not aware of why it had caused such a reaction from Nash. Before anyone had time to process what they had just seen, Hogan laid upon his downed opponent and claimed victory in the WCW title. A few hardcore Hogan fans celebrated briefly amongst a crowd of bewilderment. As Scott Hall and Scott Steiner climbed into the ring, Nash and Hogan regained their feet. All 4 men hug in celebration as it becomes clear that the men were all in on this together. I could not have been more unhappy with this outcome as a child. Even with the explanations coming from commentary, I was confused. I could not work out what had just happened, which made me upset. A moment which will go down in infamy as one of the most controversial occurrences in all of pro wrestling history broke my 7-year-old brain. Now in hindsight, I can see it as both one of the most brilliant pieces of storytelling in order to create hatred towards a set of characters, and also a moment which fundamentally undermines the entire foundation of the pro wrestling industry. It was a clear reminder to children around the world that nothing you see within the ring in WCW was spontaneous, with the combat being choreographed and every story scripted. Whatever you feel about the finger poke of doom, it's hard for me to think of a more memorable moment from my time watching WCW in the UK as a kid. For me, no matter how much mental anguish it caused me when I was younger, it will forever be iconic because of that.
Are you kidding me? He's Hulk Hogan. You don't get to be Hulk Hogan without knowing how to work the game.
Is something that's not out of the question, because with everybody having a different agenda and everybody owing everybody something in the political arena, it would be nice to have somebody that could put America first. The way I look at it, if Jesse Ventura could become governor of Minnesota, I basically beat Jesse at everything he's done anyway in his life, so I might as well run for the president. Say what you want about Terry Bollea, but one thing that nobody can deny is that the man behind the Hulk Hogan yellow and red has charisma and ego in abundance, two key factors which clearly influenced his decision to announce his involvement with politics in the late 90s. The ability to win over a crowd with declarations of honour, integrity and hard work had been a part of Hogan's repertoire for over 2 decades, so the transition from in-ring to behind podium seemed to make sense. Hogan's initial foray into the world of American populist politics came when he announced on the Jay Leno show that the Hulkster was trading in his yellow boots for a red, white and blue tie and would be throwing his hat into the ring as a potential candidate for president. What started as a confident display from Hogan as he made his announcement quickly crumbled under the questioning from Leno. When asked about his core values which would constitute Hogan's platform, Hulk explained his concept of flat tax, brother. At least he tried to explain it. When questioned by Leno, Hogan replied 16% after a momentary fumble. Still unsure as to what Hogan's vague replies meant, Jay Leno asked, "How did you come up with that number?" To which Hogan triumphantly responded, 16% is bigger than 15%, before mumbling on to the next question. If fans at the time at home weren't satisfied with these non-answers, then surely they would be rushing out to vote once they had heard Hulk's killer follow-up. When Leno asked, "Have you had any experience at all in this field?" Hogan replied, "Well, I've been making decisions all my life." This lackluster display of his political acumen, bundled with the fact that nobody of any real significance within American politics took Hogan seriously, meant that Hogan's presidential hopes never got off the starting blocks and fizzled out as quickly as they'd begun. He believed that a larger-than-life, tangerine-coloured, leathery old man with fake peroxide hair who had been involved in so many scandals and controversies throughout his career, could ever become president of the United States of America. It would just never happen. I've thought about it as of late, people calling my phone, driving me crazy about running for Senate. They want me to run for governor, they want me to run for mayor. After seeing Donald Trump's fan base and watching what Jesse Ventura did in the state of Florida, I got a feeling it wouldn't be that hard, I really do. Hogan's aspirations to step out onto the political stage once again reared their head when he was closely linked to several political figures in Donald Trump's run-in to become the president, and throughout the first few years of his presidential reign. "I don't want to be in the ring with any candidates, I want to be Trump's running mate," Hogan said. Once again proving that most modern politics are led by those who garner divisive public opinions and is often less about a background in public office as it is about Twitter followers and perceived popularity. At the moment, I'm more focused on persuading Hulk Hogan, whose real name's Terry Bollea, to challenge Governor Rick Scott for the US Senate nomination in 2018, Roger Stone said. Sure, Hogan was most likely simply a pawn in the larger political play of those who were far more cunning and experienced than himself. Hogan received support from those who sought to use his public image and sway with an audience to better position themselves. But that doesn't change the fact that we live in a world where a man who spent 30 years dancing around in his pants and getting dropped on his head, a man with zero prior experience in such a complex and nuanced position, could have potentially become a member of the United States Senate, and that is fucking terrifying.
They never even gave me a chance to sit down and throw things around, throw ideas around. They just basically came in and said, well, you know, Hulk, we've got no creative ideas for you, so catch you down the road.
Hogan then won the undisputed title from Triple H, a man at the peak of his career, 1 month later. After some stupid segments covering up his tiring body and struggles with injury involving motorcycles, Hogan and Undertaker faced off at Judgment Day that year, and Hogan took the single worst chokeslam of all time. Shawn Michaels then jumped at the opportunity to face Hogan. He realised the Icon's career was coming to an end and wanted one last great match. Vince McMahon got the two to agree to a 3-match series, with Hogan winning the first and Michaels winning the second and third. All men agreed until just before SummerSlam 2005, when it was decided it would be the only time the two would face off. Hogan did indeed win the first match, but that would be it. Shawn, with his famous hot-headed ego, completely oversold every single move Hogan made, flying around the ring as Hogan's overtrodden and predictable 80s moveset didn't really work to sell the reality of the wrestling in the match. Shawn continued to comically feign over-the-top damage and really ruined the match with Hulk Hogan. It's kind of funny, but I hate it.
From his heyday in the 80s, Hulk Hogan says he's down 70 pounds and now steroid-free, but that some of his fellow wrestlers are not.
I don't think it'll ever go away completely as long as there's a competitive nature in any type of physicality and there's a competitive edge to be gained. I think whether it's legal or illegal, some people will cross that line or step up to that line to gain that advantage.
Melanie Pillman says it was Hulk Hogan who told Bryan he could obtain HGH from Dr. Edmund Chen at the Life Extension Institute. And a former wrestler who wished to remain anonymous says Hogan recommended Chen to many wrestlers.
It was at this time that Hulk Hogan released his autobiography, in which he made the claim that Elvis was a huge fan before Hogan joined the WWF. He did work in Memphis in 1997, however. Elvis died in 1977. Elvis Presley would come to the arena to see me wrestle when I was working in Memphis, Hogan said, but this is, again, simply not true.
What's the problem right now? What's the relationship that exists between you and Vince?
Well, it takes two to tango. And there's a long history, like you said, almost 20 years of Hulk Hogan and the McMahon family, his father first, and now Vince. The problem is the problem is I don't know what the problem is.
When the NWO appeared in WWE at No Way Out in 2002, it was a huge declaration from Vince McMahon that the biggest and only place for pro wrestling was now his all-encompassing megalith. If you wanted to see the original trio of Hall, Nash and Hogan, you'd better tune in to WWE. On screen, Vincent Kennedy McMahon had brought in the NWO as his allies and henchmen, there to help McMahon in his battle for ownership of the company with Ric Flair. At this time, Hogan became embroiled in a feud with WWE's biggest star, The Rock. Brother, I can't believe that I'm in the World Wrestling Federation, and that in such a short amount of time, Hulkamania is running wilder than ever, and I got my fans back, plus a whole bunch of new ones. I can't believe that the Federation gave me the opportunity to fulfill my dream and complete this journey by becoming the undisputed champion, something that I've never accomplished. The Rock broke almost all of my ribs at WrestleMania 18 with the rock bottom. He wanted to end the match there and then. I told him to relax and told him to give me another rock bottom for good measure.
Do you smell what The Rock is cooking?
This man's name isn't really The Rock, but his character and his actions are carved in stone long before he steps in the ring.
the pair going on to have one of the most historic WWE matches of all time at WrestleMania 18. Though Hogan suffered a defeat at the hands of his younger opponent, the fans were on his side. The NWO was supposed to be the antagonists. They were brought in as the bad guys, so to have Hogan garner such a positive reception, arguably a louder set of cheers than the almighty Rock, then something needed to change. Hall and Nash came to the ring and attacked Hogan after the bell, adding insult to injury and removing him from the group. This led to Hogan teaming up with The Rock and taking on his former allies in tag competition. By April of 2002, The Big Show and X-Pac had both been recruited to the NWO once again and made up a four-man team which continued to aid McMahon in his conquest over Ric Flair. In May the next month, Scott Hall was involved in an incident whilst on tour involving alcohol, and seemingly out of nowhere was fired by WWE. This signalled the end for NWO within the company, a fact that was cemented when Kevin Nash sustained a career-threatening injury. And, though it had started with one of the most iconic and explosive moments in all of pro wrestling history, the historic New World Order dissolved from our screens with little more than a whimper. When the WWE version of the NWO angle was unfolding, I got a call from Jim Ross, which really surprised me because of the tension in the relationship. He was very professional but very distant, and offered me an opportunity to come in and join WWE as part of a storyline. Now, I'm never one that's like, I'm only interested if you tell me what the story is, but he offered me an opportunity to come in, and the timing wasn't right for me. It just didn't feel right. Jim wasn't being as forthcoming as I would hope he would be, at least to get me excited about it, so I passed on it. Just as the invasion angle left many fans asking for more and asking what could have been, thus the storyline of the NWO followed suit.
Hogan had a set routine way he worked. He could only work a certain way. He had to work the Hulk Hogan kind of way.
The one thing about Hogan is that Hogan isn't going to come in to be buried, whereas the rest of them are just going to do whatever they're told. Mick Foley, Shawn Michaels, Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race, and Ric Flair all put to the boot by the then rising villain Randy Orton. SummerSlam 2006 came around and there was only one legend bigger, only one left to defeat. To cement Orton's legacy, still only in his mid-20s. Hogan agreed to lose to Orton if WWE would promote his daughter's music album. It was as horrible as you'd expect, but WWE did so in order for the storyline to have its conclusion. Days before the event, Hogan refused to perform unless he won, and did so at the biggest event of the summer. The topic was debated again and again with no conclusion before the day of the show. The referee of the match, Marty Elias, explained, "As we entered the dressing room, there sat Hulk Hogan, Jimmy, Mouth of the South Heart, and Brutus the Barber Beefcake. As we discussed the match, the issue of who was going over came up, and it went back and forth for a bit. Vince McMahon finally came into the dressing room to chat with Hulk, and the issue of who was over was settled right there." During the match, Orton managed to land an RKO and pinned Hogan for the victory. However, Hulk's foot was on the rope, and as the referee noticed, restarted the match. Hogan hulked up, dropped the leg and pinned Orton for the 1-2-3, destroying Orton's run as the Legend Killer in order to put himself over in what is to date his last ever official WWE match. At SummerSlam I fought Randy Orton, and me and Vince had some problems with the money. Before SummerSlam I was a little worried because instead of being a main event match, I was on 4th against Randy Orton. When I heard about the first 3 matches at the Fleet Center in Boston, it sounded like a funeral. And when I listened to the crowd's reaction to those matches, it did sound like a funeral. Then when my music came on, it was like the old days. People were stood up, it was electric. Randy is a great hard-working wrestler, and we fought an old-school style match. That was the most exciting match I've ever had in the Fleet Center.
Sometimes when, the darkest cloud comes over you, then the brightest light shines.
Coming up, Hulk Hogan's unlucky to be alive, seriously injured after getting into a high-speed car chase, or at least his passenger was seriously injured. Details straight ahead. Welcome back. Police investigating a horrific car accident, Clearwater, Florida, involving pro wrestler Hulk Hogan's son, 17-year-old Nick Hogan, released from the hospital today after the car he was driving hit a raised median, flipped around, smashed into a palm tree. Police say Hogan was driving at a high rate of speed before the crash, and both he and a passenger had to be airlifted to a nearby hospital. The passenger remains in critical condition.
The next 2 years would prove to be some of the most difficult and straining periods of Hogan's entire life. A family man at heart would see his and several other families' lives changed forever. For Nick Hogan, real name Nick Belair, he had lived his entire life in the inescapable shadow of his father's fame and fortune. A typical spoilt trust fund baby, I don't blame Nick for spending his formative years being the black sheep of the family, with the regular boundaries which come from being a normal everyday teenager removed for the likes of Nick and his sister Brooke. I find it somewhat understandable as to how they would eventually turn out as adults, for better and for worse. Nick, however, always seemed as if he was the more extreme personality of the two siblings, and appeared as if he even relished his bad boy persona, even if only in the context of a supremely privileged and sheltered white teenager. This would unfortunately continue to spiral out of control for the young Hogan son, who found himself caught up in the seedy underbelly of street and drag car racing, boasting online of his personalised car registration plates which read COE HSP, an acronym widely understood by car enthusiasts to represent the phrase capable of eluding high-speed pursuit. And capable of that Nick and his souped-up cars may have been, but one thing he could not elude was the tragedy which the young man would have a direct involvement in, when, in November of 2007, Nick Hogan handed himself into the local police station.
Of course, the big question about this car accident was racing involved. It's no secret that Nick Hogan, whose legal name is Nick Belair, is into drag racing. There are dozens of videos on YouTube of the 17-year-old drifting on tracks in souped-up cars. But Florida police say it's too early right now to tell what led to last night's accident, except that it was a spectacular wreck involving excessive speed.
He was charged with reckless driving involving serious bodily injury, an accusation which was unavoidable for Nick. You could turn on any local news station in the area over the time leading up to Nick's arrest and see coverage of the destruction which he had caused when he had crashed his car at high speed. The crash had initially left both Nick and his friend John seriously injured, needing emergency rescue before both were rushed to nearby hospitals. Neither man was wearing a seatbelt when the crash occurred, which serves two purposes in this instance. One, it meant that the horrific injuries which both men suffered, leaving John Graziano in a coma, something which could perhaps have been played out differently if they were both wearing seatbelts. And two, in the upcoming legal case, the fact that both men were not wearing seatbelts formed the core defence for Hogan's lawyers. After all, if the two men had been racing their cars that fateful night, then wouldn't both men have been smart enough to have at least reacted to the extreme danger by putting on their seatbelts? This is a question nobody will know for sure, and one that did not play well with courts as the legal case against Nick Hogan's recklessness became insurmountable. In May of 2008, Hogan delivered a plea of no contest and was sentenced to 8 months in prison and a further 5 years on parole, with Hogan's driving licence being withheld for a separate 3 years, as well as being forced to serve 500 hours of community service for his crime. This would prove to be little recompense for John Graziano and his family, with the young man being temporarily stuck in a vegetative state, and now, after years of rehabilitation, is left needing permanent around-the-clock assistance and care. The family were awarded $1.5 million by Nick Belair, a fee settled out of court and said to cover the medical expenses incurred since their car crash destroyed young John's life. Now, with Nick being released soon after from prison, you'd think that the horrors that took place would still be fresh in his mind. And who can say for certain if they are or aren't? However, comments made by Nick to his father, which were released to the press, show that both the Hogans hold little sympathy for the way in which that night played out. Hulk Hogan said that God laid some heavy shit on him because of things that he was into, to which Nick agreed, saying John was a negative person. It's all pretty dark stuff.
That it's not looking good, and they think that he might have brain damage because he's pretty incoherent right now. And it's unfortunate because he's a U.S. Marine. He just came back from Iraq last year, so hoping for the best.
It's terrible. He survives Iraq, but not a car crash.
In 2009, Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff created a partnership and put on a set of shows across Australia. 4 nights, with the main event each evening being a singles match between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. 2 men with a storied past, and as Hogan had never wrestled in Australia before, had fans young and old clambering for a ticket to see some good clean family fun. However, the stipulation being no disqualification for one of the nights saw both men, who are way beyond their prime at this point, heavily rely on outside interference and blood to win over the fans. Some young families were said to have been shocked at what they witnessed, not realising how violent the show would become, especially as by the end of the match, both Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan were completely drenched in crimson. Hogan won all 4 of the matches, obviously, and Ric Flair went above and beyond to get his fair share of the attention, who, by the end of the no disqualification match, had rekindled an iconic look from days past gone. Ric Flair, his dazzling streak of blonde hair soaked pink with his and his opponent's blood. By September of 2008, Terry Bollea was facing financial ruin. His drawn-out divorce proceedings paired with an extravagant lifestyle meant that many of his financial reserves had all but dried up. Over the past 20 years, Hogan estimates that he had spent, lost and wasted over $100 million and was looking for a way to fix his monetary predicament. This is when the chance of a lifetime arose, when the visionary director Darren Aronofsky approached Bollea to star in the leading role in his upcoming film, a realistic, gritty and unsettling look at the realities of being an over-the-hill performer in a young man's world. The role was seemingly the perfect fit for Hogan, who, through the offered position, would not directly be playing an autobiographical look at himself, but would be able to, nonetheless, bring with him his years of first-hand knowledge, successes, and hardships to the performance. However, after much personal debate and introspection, Bollea declined the role in the upcoming film, stating that he didn't deserve it, showing that perhaps those endless pools of confidence had finally run out for Hogan. This led to the film being hindered from the start, with production faltering at every step, and a no-name actor being brought in to fill Hogan's role. The film released to little critical or public fanfare and was quickly forgotten on the pile of other countless forgettable wrestling movies. But we all know that isn't what happened. Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler starred Mickey Rourke in the performance of a lifetime. The film received huge praise for its approach to telling the real story behind the scenes of independent wrestling business, and was heralded for its visual beauty and subtleties, being considered by many, including myself, the single greatest representation of pro wrestling ever committed to celluloid. And also, Hogan was never approached for the role. Seriously. According to the director, he was never even considered. We never mentioned Hulk Hogan nor any other wrestlers. We just wanted to keep the fiction alive and not pull people out of it. When asked directly, Darren Aronofsky has categorically denied Hogan's lies on several public occasions. So, perhaps, Hogan's one final chance at success on the silver screen was a failure, or more likely, simply just another one of his lies.
You got to go with the guys that are established.
Represent the band, that team of Scott Hall and Big Sexy Kevin Nash.
Hall, Nash and Hogan met up once again in TNA, originally stating that they wanted to get the band back together. However, all 3 men were way past their primes at this point, and through injury and fatigue were not able to perform at the high level we had seen through their runs in WCW and WWE. Hogan arrived just as he did in WCW, later than Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, something which signified this time that he was more focused on being a singles competitor. Way into the final stages of his career, Hulk's inability to perform in the ring meant he relied more on soap opera style segments involving forced marriages and his daughter's music career, and just as everything in TNA at the time was a poor attempt to rekindle the fire brought forth by its predecessors, the company even brought Sting and Hogan face to face one last time. The results were to be expected, with the feud between the pair merely a shadow of what could have been during their prime at Starrcade back in 1997. Scott Hall continued to struggle with drug and alcohol abuse and spent several spells away from programming.
One more for the bad guys.
Leaving Kevin Nash without a faction for large periods. Nash himself shone during this era, his charm and charisma really coming through as the big man was allowed more microphone freedom and used it with a flourish. After several forgettable years, the three parted ways once again, and for the second time it truly felt like this was the end of the road.
For some unknown reason, I picked Scott Hall and Sean Waltman to be my friend. I've done everything I could in my career to keep you guys employed. I've carried your asses on my back for the last time.
It was later in 2007 when further misery would befall the Belair household as the stress caused by the car crash and Nick Hogan's prison sentence was further exacerbated as Terry and Linda's marriage began to fall apart after alleged infidelities on the part of Terry Belair, who said, "I practically begged her, please don't file. Our son's just had this accident. If we do this now, it will make us look like the Britney Spears family. Please don't file for divorce." A sentence which, at first glance, made me feel a real sense of despair for this once great man. It made me feel sorry for Terry Belair, the person, and helped me to relate to him on a level which I have struggled to find throughout this near 7 months journey of creating this video series. However, as I read and reread the sentence, I realised how I had seemingly been so naive. Begging your loved one for one last chance is a position which we all hope to never find ourselves in. The desperation and vulnerability of Hogan as you imagine him clinging on to his former life, and the romance which him and Linda once shared is so sad. But his problem with the marriage breakup was seemingly not one of romance, as he continued to elaborate on just why he didn't want the divorce. He wanted to save face. Read the sentence again. He wanted to protect his reputation and his family's ability to remain marketable. He didn't want to save his marriage because he loved his wife. Terry Belair wanted to save his marriage to save himself. And that is the key idea which runs through every single facet of this man's life. Something which started as a burning passion for fame and success infected both the character of Hulk Hogan and the man behind the muscles in Terry Belair. By this point, seemingly, the line separating the two had disappeared almost entirely, and even in his most desperate hour, all Hogan boasts about caring for is the way in which he is portrayed by the public, and that, in my opinion, is the saddest fact of all.
For 20 years and counting, when it comes to wrestling, the Hulk's been the man. But even though he kicks butt in the ring, in real life, Hollywood Hulk Hogan is, well, sad.
Perhaps this sadness was evident to Terry at this time too. After all, nobody was closer to the misery than the man himself, who, following a messy and drawn-out legal battle over property and finances with his now ex-wife, began to explore out into the media spotlight once again, this time with a new autobiography and several miserable appearances on daytime television in hopes at rekindling that spark. Scratching that itch which incessantly burrowed into the spot just under that famous Hulkamania bandana, that ever-present need for more fame. It all became too much. In a time of true darkness, Hogan searched his house for a gun, sleeping tablets and strong alcohol, falling into a deep depression which left the once great man firmly planted on his knees. To end it all, that would be Hogan's only escape. At least that is how Hogan explained his suicide attempts when he was promoting his book on one of the aforementioned talk shows. With a lump in his throat and the suggestion of a tear in his eye, Hogan spoke of how he found religion in a stronger way and was reminded of his faith during this period. He also explained how, when he was at his most grave, he was brought back from the brink of death by a rather unexpected friend. That friend would turn out to be Layla Ali, daughter of legendary boxer Muhammad. A woman who had worked briefly with Hogan on a televised segment just happened to be the one who reached out to Hogan and who is credited by the Hulk for saving his life.
Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. You have single-handedly ruined our 25-year marriage and our family. And yet you continue hiding behind those sunglasses, false smile, oh, and the bandana.
Out of everything that I've been through, this one hit me probably the hardest, and that's a heck of a thing to say, because I've been through a lot of crazy stuff.
Including an admission of steroid use and his son's legal issues. But last month, a new controversy which threatens to erase his legacy. The National Enquirer reports that Hogan used racial slurs in audio secretly recorded.
This past, do you think they'll ever ask you to come back?
I'm not sure,
Would you come back if they asked?
Hogan, not now, brother.
Hogan is a 13-time world champion, an IWGP heavyweight champion in its early version, a 6-time WWF world heavyweight champion, and a 6-time WCW world heavyweight champion. His first WCW world heavyweight championship reign is the longest in history. Hogan was the first wrestler to win consecutive Royal Rumbles in 1990 and 91, and was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2005, as well as being removed and reinstated. A key component in the early history of Wrestlemania, Hulk Hogan headlined 7 out of the first 8 Wrestlemania shows. Hulk Hogan is one of the most requested celebrities for the Make-A-Wish Foundation and has granted over 200 wishes for children with critical illnesses. He is among only a few of the celebrities to have granted over 200 wishes.
When you look at a 40-year career, just gone. They were worried about losing sponsors and network support.
This all changed, however, when in April of 2012, Hulk Hogan was embroiled in a scandal after the release of a private and illegal video recorded of him and distributed online. It's disgusting because it's such a violation of privacy, and it's disgusting because Hulk Hogan's old and gross. I mean, come on, look at this man. It is terrible that anyone could ever secretly film someone in any circumstance, but during an intimate and private moment of lovemaking is deplorable. The woman in the video was Heather Clem, who was the wife of Hogan's long-term friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. But seemingly, Bubba was in on the action. He can be heard on the video, which he secretly recorded, saying, "You two can do your thing." Now, I have no right to pass judgment on a man who likes to be cuckolded by a monster like Hulk Hogan and his 24-inch pythons, but that isn't why we're here. Worst of all, in the secret video, Hogan used racial terms to describe his daughter's then black boyfriend that were as offensive as they were ignorant and have no place in a civilized society. Hogan showed in a moment where he thought he was away from the public eye, a moment where he could truly be himself, that he was in fact probably a racist. A man who created a character who would inspire millions of children around the world to be better and realise their dreams. His theme song even tells us that Hogan wants to fight for the rights of every man. But I guess every man doesn't include black men in Hulk Hogan's mind. With his public image on the line, in October of 2012, Hogan had to act fast and recover some of the respect he had lost due to his now public racist outpouring. So you'd think that he would go on a charm offensive, use that charisma to swing favour back his way, and spend his days split between attempting to right his obvious wrongdoings to the black community and begging for forgiveness from the wrestling fans who he had so deeply offended.
Completely humiliated. I was just so desperate. I went over there. One thing led to another. I just let my guard down.
But no. Hogan filed a lawsuit against Bubba the Love Sponge and his wife Heather Clem, alleging invasion of privacy, negligent and intentional infliction of emotional harm, and quickly settled out of court following a public apology from the pair.
Bollea filed a privacy suit against Gawker, which claimed among its many defenses that the publishing of the video is protected by the First Amendment.
Turning his attention towards the company which had made the video in which Hogan made his racism known, public for the world to see. He then successfully sued Gawker for defamation, loss of privacy and emotional pain in a lawsuit where he claimed $100 million and settled out of court for $30 million in damages.
Just give us something, Hulk.
This morning, an absolute victory for Hulk Hogan in his invasion of privacy battle for posting a secretly recorded tape of Hogan.
And the hack pseudo-journalism company folded on March the 18th of 2016. Around this time, Hogan spoke to Howard Stern and said on his radio show, "It was a bad choice and a very low point. I was with some friends and made a wrong choice. It has devastated me. I have never been this hurt."
It's been a surreal trial from the start, to say the least.
It made me a little bit sick.
Hulk Hogan's ex-wife Linda is speaking out about the staggering $115 million award the wrestling legend just won.
I don't know how he can sleep at night knowing that he's got the money for doing what he did.
A quote which I feel perfectly sums up the selfishness of Hogan. His first thoughts are seemingly always about how the situation affected him. Yes, I agree that it is disgusting to secretly record someone, no matter what the circumstances. Yes, I think Hogan is well within his rights to feel betrayed and hurt by what was his close friend. And I agree that he should have tackled Gawker with the full force of the law on his side.
Gawker Media founder Nick Denton.
About the middle of the trial, I walk in the men's room and it's me and Nick Denton by ourselves. If this was Wrestlemania and he was in the ring with me, it was just me and him, wouldn't it be fun?
But what about those black people that are huge Hulk Hogan fans? Some in their 50s and 60s enjoyed Hogan back in his heyday at WrestleMania 3 and followed his career for over 40 years. How does Hogan think his horrid comments made them feel? How does Hogan think it would feel to have someone who you looked up to and admired, supported and cheered for, turn out to hate a part of you which you have no control over? What about the African American wrestlers that have shared the ring and locker room with Hogan since the 70s? How does he think this news made them feel? Since the incident occurred, many black wrestlers have spoken out about the situation and given an insight into the matter. Titus O'Neil explained, "This is not about a second or third chance. This is about a man making a decision to make statements that he truly felt in his heart, I believe, at that time. He may not feel that way now, he may regret it, but to come out and say, 'I didn't know I was being recorded,' and 'be careful what you say,' and 'I don't remember saying that stuff,' when you start out an apology like that, dude, you already lost it." In 2015, WWE cut ties with Hogan when the public backlash grew too large. Years of glory, followed by years of terrible publicity, led to a time where the company and the Immortal One parted ways. WWE removed Hogan from planned promotional dates and from certain areas of their website. Fans were divided about how such a legend should be treated. A statement from WWE read, "WWE terminated its contract with Terry Bollea, aka Hulk Hogan. WWE is committed to embracing and celebrating individuals from all backgrounds as demonstrated by the diversity of our employees, performers, and fans worldwide." Hogan was removed from the WWE Hall of Fame and stepped back from his on-screen appearances with the company, making his way onto new channels and chat shows in order to air his grievances and attempt to make amends.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson states, "I've known Terry for a lot of years. I had not known the man to be racist." George Foreman says, "I do not condone the language he used, but he is no racist. He is a good guy."
A few years passed, and then WWE said, "After a 3-year suspension, Hulk Hogan has been reinstated into the WWE Hall of Fame. This second chance follows Hogan's numerous public apologies and volunteering work with young people, where he is helping them learn from his mistakes. This led to Hogan being invited backstage to apologise face to face to the wrestlers in WWE. Hogan said, "I said those words. It was totally unacceptable, and I just really wanted to get in front of all the talent and apologise because I know I hurt this business and I just want to move forward." Things didn't go exactly to Hulk's plan, however, as many of the performers in the locker room felt that Hogan's apology only further strengthened the idea that he was sorry that he got caught, rather than being genuinely sorry for his hurtful and racist remarks. There were very mixed feelings, with many not believing he was sincere, reported Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Unfortunately, I must echo the sentiment and dissatisfaction expressed by many of my fellow contemporaries concerning Mr. Belair's apology and its lack of true contrition, remorse, and a desire to change, tweeted Titus O'Neil, who was in the locker room to witness Hogan's apology. Hogan said, "I just hope the Brotherhood can get back to the way it was. Outside the ring, you're supposed to protect your brother. In this case, it's a situation where 75, 80, 90% of the wrestlers are protecting me, and they're giving me another chance to move forward. There's just a few wrestlers that kind of don't understand the bond and the brotherhood of wrestling. If someone makes a mistake, you need to forgive them and move on and try to let them prove themselves." He seems as if he is not truly willing to take responsibility for what he said or how he thought about black people, rather pushing the blame onto those who don't accept his apology or subscribe to the idea that he simply used the words rather than being a racist. Since his reinstatement by WWE, Hulk made his return at a Saudi Arabia show, which, considering all of the controversy surrounding WWE's involvement in this part of the world, seemed fitting. At the show, Hogan said nothing of real importance, hyped the crowd, and ignored the giant elephant in the room. He has since gone on to introduce Wrestlemania, opening the two-night event alongside Titus O'Neil in what at best feels like an attempt to show how much he has changed, and at worst looks like WWE attempting to garner fan support for Hogan whilst using O'Neil as a pawn. Regardless, a loud group of fans who were present at the show seemingly didn't appreciate the gesture and booed Hogan throughout both segments, showing that even if WWE and Hulk want to leave his racist comments in the past, some fans will not be so quick to move on. On a radio show, when asked about his use of racially insensitive language, Hogan replied, "Everyone down in Miami, Lil Wayne, Birdman, they're all calling me the N-word, and then I started saying it. And I always said it, but now all of a sudden I get heat when I say it, and they say, 'Hogan, you can't say that.' So I say, 'Why can they say it to me then?'" Hogan has spent decades fighting in the ring across from wrestlers from all walks of life. He has shared locker rooms and hotel suites with men and women from all different races and nationalities. Numerous wrestling personalities have come out to personally explain how they spent countless hours with the Hulk and never thought him to be a racist person. Perhaps he simply hid it well. In the wake of the Gorka scandal, many lifelong fans, some from all over the world, have shown their forgiveness towards Hogan. Many pro wrestlers have continued to come out in support for Hogan over the last few years. His former friend and pro wrestling legend, the late James Harris, said in an interview, "That's not the Hogan I know," said the man behind the Kamala character in WWE. "Hogan always treated me like a gentleman. He always cared about me. He was my friend. He'd tell me, 'Brother, I'm getting my money. I hope you're getting yours, because you're putting asses in seats.' When it came to our matches, he valued my input. He'd always say, 'What do you want to do out there, brother?' I'd tell him, and then we'd go out there and do it. He's a sweetheart of a guy. I'm not mad at him at all. Deep down, he's really not like that. He's a super nice guy. I don't believe he's a racist at all, no matter what he said." Hulk Hogan's ex-wife, Linda Belair, was recently caught up in a racial incident of her own. During the civil unrest which occurred following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Linda took to Twitter to let her thoughts on the aftermath be known. She said, "Watching the looting, It's all Afro-Americans. Not sure how robbing and stealing set the record straight, but if they want to be heard, they need to be civilized. Tony Khan, the owner of All Elite Wrestling, took offense to Linda's stance on the issue and replied, "You've now joined your husband in being banned from AEW shows. Congratulations." He had been praying for this day in regards to WWE reinstating him within the company, which Hulk was such a fundamental part of. We must see how much WWE means to the man behind the character, and we must at least attempt to believe him when he says that the incident from way back in 2007 was the worst mistake of his life. However, it is a difficult subject to broach for me. Who am I to tell you how to feel about what Hogan has done and said? Who am I to decide whether or not Hogan deserves to be forgiven? I will leave those questions for you to answer instead. As Kofi Kingston famously said in his response to Hulk Hogan's racism, on a personal level, when someone makes racist and hateful comments about any race or group of people, especially to the degree that Hogan made about our people, we find it difficult to simply forget, regardless of how long ago it was or the situation in which those comments were made. Either through their words or their actions, believe that they have changed and moved on from their racist beliefs. The damage which they once caused can linger on in the minds of those it affected long after the fact. I'm under no illusion about the significance of Hulk Hogan on the history of pro wrestling, and even though I must disagree with extremists who claim that pro wrestling wouldn't exist in the modern era without Terry Bollea's run in the red and yellow, I can certainly appreciate and be thankful for the legacy that this iconic performer left behind. Seemingly, many others still keep Hulk Hogan close to their hearts, with interest in his life story and wrestling career still ever present. GQ recently reported Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, the writer-director duo behind the Joker film, would be teaming up yet again for a Hulk Hogan biopic. The film, starring America's favourite Chris Hemsworth, will be produced with Bradley Cooper. It's scheduled to be released on Netflix. Hogan himself will reportedly serve as both a consultant and executive producer. People want more Hulk Hogan after everything he's been through, all of the ups and downs, the historic highs and the darkest of lows, and even on the other side of those deepest moments, something about this bandana-wearing, handbar moustache-sporting legend keeps fans around the world coming back for more. And that alone is something which I think perfectly encapsulates why I think that Hulkamania will never truly die in the eyes of some pro wrestling fans.